call the meeting of the board back into order, and we will resume the meeting with the Finance Committee, and I'll turn it over to Curator Steelman, Chair of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next is going to be, we've still got Chief Financial Officer Rapp, and we're going to go over the 2019 State Capital Appropriations Request for capital improvements for the University of Missouri. And I have also told Mr. Rapp, I hope that we have and can at least start a little bit of the discussion on how we as a board move forward on some of these capital decisions.
Thank you, Curator Steelman. This is the final action item that we'll have in front of the board as it relates to finance. And we're seeking approval of the state capital appropriation request. This was presented as an information item in April. There's been some changes, and I'll go over those. But before I review the projects, I know we've discussed this at several points in the meeting today already, but I do want to be clear. The board approving the state capital appropriation request doesn't constitute project approval. The projects still have to be brought back with a funding plan and also a plan for how we'd move forward with the project. So I just want to be clear on that. I know I already said all projects over, capital projects over $5 million require a funding plan and board approval. Any debt finance project, whether it's 100,000 or 5 million, requires board approval. As I go to the next slide, this request represents the priority projects for each campus. The MU request has been modified to include the Translational Medicine Complex. And this plan is consistent with the master plan update that Vice Chancellor Ward will present later to the board for approval, and really fits with their stewardship and growth model. It's looking to invest in a research building and then also take care of the academic buildings we have. As we've discussed in the past, we know we have significant deferred maintenance backlogs on all of our campuses, but Gary will go into more detail when he presents the master plan. The UMKC Spencer Chemistry Building Phase 2 is the same as we discussed in April. It would allow for completion of the items that weren't able to be done in Phase 1. It'll improve the teaching and research space. We've got chemistry and biology classes that would be taught in this space. Many of the current students at UMKC would be going through this building. The Schrank Hall Phase 3 is what was presented as part of the master plan the board approved at the April meeting. This would be the final renovation, and will provide additional teaching and research labs. Almost every student, I think, on the S&T campus would take a course in this building. And then for UMSL, this project is really focused on reducing and improving the campus occupied square footage. As we know, UMSL currently has more space than they need. It's not of all of the quality they need, but really would allow them to reduce their campus FC&I by over $13.2 million. It also would reduce their operating costs by $288,000. I welcome any questions the board might have.
Questions and discussion. And Mr. Chairman and President Choi, again, with your permission, given what your idea on a task force, I'm also hoping we can at least have, while we're in a public session, some discussion and some understanding of what some of the curators view as priorities as we move forward with that project. But I'll be watching the time, as I always do. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask Brian, this transitional medicine building complex, total $250 million, is that right?
No, I think the $250 million is also for the renovation of some other space and tear down of some other space on the campus. I think the transitional medicine building, I'm looking at Vice Chancellor Ward, I think it's between 130, 160.
That's what I was thinking. We talked about earlier. We've talked about this for a year and a half or so, and 150, maybe 180 was talked about, but I'd never seen the number 250. I couldn't figure out where that. But you.
So yeah, so there's if you looked in the materials, there's also funding in there to deal with some other space on the campus, and some of it would be tearing down space, and some of it would be renovating space on the campus. And again, I think at least for MU, with their master plan update, Vice Chancellor Ward's going to go into much more detail than I did here.
Ryan, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Ryan, it looks like each campus, has a state appropriations request, state capital appropriations request. Is this typically how it's been done? Because when I look at capital appropriations, MU may have 6, and some of those may rank higher than some of the other campuses, or S&T may have a few that may rank higher than UMKC or UMSL. Are we just doing this where we say, well, each campus gets one, to try to be fair, or are we actually taking our best projects and moving them forward with an appropriation request out of the system? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think we touched on it earlier, and I'm looking at Beth, and I want to make sure I'm right. We are limited to one request per campus to the state. We can't make, the maximum request we can make is for 4 projects, 1 per campus. We could make less and not submit one for 1 campus, but we couldn't submit 2 projects to the state for 1 campus.
Who set that rule? Or
The state, that's the state's rule. So it's not just applies to our 4 campuses, it applies to all the 4 years in the state that they get to submit 1 project. So the 14 4-years will all submit 1 project. But I think that raises the point that we discussed earlier before lunch of, in some ways, this is a dated way of thinking of our capital, because you look at this and you think about these projects and where the funding is going to come from, and we'd love to see the state support, but we also have to be able to start looking at these projects and saying, how are we going to get some of these capital projects for our academic space done with or without state support? So my point being is that rule might have made sense when everybody was getting money for capital, and we have received some money for capital to do Laffrey Hall and some of the other things about 2 years ago. But barring that, we haven't had significant state support for capital projects since 2000.
I would like to look into this because it's not a system approach to me. It seems as though it's further siloing the campuses, and if we have system priorities, we're not able to really address them here to some extent, because we have to give everybody a project, and that doesn't seem like it supports the system 100%.
And I think with what Chairman Graham proposed before lunch, I think we would look to address that through that process.
Can I ask about, you said we can submit 1 per campus.
Correct.
So are we submitting for 250 million, or are we submitting for 150, as Phil said, 150, 160? How does that?
So what we would submit to the state would be in this left-hand column. It would be in the
But I
150
mean,
million.
you're not going to go to the state and say, we want to do this building plus all this other stuff, right? Because you can't do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
I'm just I want to make sure I
Yeah,
understand that process.
exactly. And by no means, if the board approves this, do we walk out here and go, well, we're ready to get started with the project. We've got a lot of work to do to identify how we'd fund these projects regardless of where state support lands.
So then, when I look at that, the transitional medicine, which we've heard a lot about that, and it sounds wonderful, but that would mean that, University of Missouri Columbia says that is our #1 priority for next year, and it fits into our 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year goal. Is that?
Yes, yeah, and that's what you'll see presented in the master plan update from Vice Chancellor Ward today, and I think that.
See that later.
Yeah, correct. And really, if the board were to approve that as part of the master plan, then it's incumbent upon us as management to start to figure out, okay, how are we going to look at funding a project like that?
And how much did you say on UMSL, the bottom one there, how much did you say they'll save a year?
I think it was around $233,000 in operating costs. It also takes almost $15 million in deferred maintenance off the books for them. So it really is about just how do we reduce the footprint in UMSL and have more efficient space.
And how do we do that? Are we just ending leases and?
Well, they wouldn't be leases, but taking some buildings down that we
Taking some-
currently
okay.
have. Also, I think some of this would be HVAC type renovations where maybe the mechanical components we have in some of the buildings now aren't as efficient as they could be.
I agree with Darrell's comment that it seems artificial to say each year, each campus can propose what they think is most important. And one of the things that I think David Steelman and I have agreed on is we need to have a system view. I agree with that. And a campus's proposal may or may not be a priority. We didn't prioritize last year when we went through and made approvals. We approved, and they weren't always on a unanimous vote. But it is a good thing, and I'm glad that you're doing a task force to move this for discussion. And it may not be that every year each campus gets a project proposed. You need to take the long-term view, even though curators come and go, and actually administrators come and go sometimes, which is sometimes good. So it's a complex situation, but if we're going to be dealing to programs of excellence and not having duplication or not fostering duplication that exists, you have to take a system view, because not every campus can do everything, nor should they. Can we afford it? One thing that you said, I think it was before lunch, that I'm a little bit curious about. You said 3 buckets, and the third bucket was if somebody wants to give, have a building named or give a building that needs to be paid for by private resources. Does that mean that even if it fits within the campus, and even if it fits within a system view, that you won't have new buildings, even if it fits within, let's say, an overarching category and is a program of excellence, that it has to be built all with private funds? You didn't mean that, did you? If you have something and you want to contribute, it's important to the campus, it's important to the system, that it has to be all privately funded?
Yes, but then to what you described, that project would be in that first bucket of that's the priority project
Good.
that we're working on for that campus. What I'm trying to say is we have a lot of other good projects out there that donors are interested in supporting, and if they're willing to give the full support for those projects and help us fund the operating costs, we could think about those. But rather than, I think that is an important distinction to draw, that to the example you gave of if it's in that first bucket, we're going to do what we can to get that project done regardless of the funding source.
And hopefully the development officers like Tom Hiles and the others for the other campuses and the chancellors will help guide prospective major donors toward what is important for the campus.
Correct.
And hopefully we'll have some system oversight, which frankly, I don't know we've had before, or ever for that matter, that the system has exercised some leadership in saying, well, you may want that, but that doesn't fit in because that's not a program of excellence.
Go ahead, President. Oh, go ahead. I just, on these state capital appropriation requests, we've been submitting these now, we've submitted them for years. My whole point is we've only had 1 year in the last 15 years where we've gotten any funding from it. So I think we've got to, that's why we actually have to rethink how we approach capital, because we're basing it off, well, we can make an annual request to the state and we will get support, we'll get the support for those projects. Well, if you look at the history, recent history, it would tell you that's not going to be the case.
So I've got 2 follow-up questions and then I'll be quiet. The first one is, of the ones that we've proposed, how much do we have in donor support for MU research? We're asking for a state appropriation of $150 million, but how much do we have raised for that project in private support?
I don't believe, I'm one of the chancellors can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we have any private support for any of these projects.
What about for Spencer Chemistry?
No, for every project on here, there's no private support.
Okay. How much do we have for the greenhouse?
As of right now, none, but we're going to look to see if we can do something with the naming on the building.
Okay, so we're going to look for support, but we've already approved that.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I'll reserve my final point for later and defer to everybody else for a while.
Could I just add that when it comes to renovations, it is very difficult to get external funding for renovations. Most donors want to contribute to something that advances the university as opposed to just contributing to the renovation of a state-owned facility. So that's why you won't see a lot of dollars under Spencer Chemistry because from external sources or campus, because it's a difficult task to undertake.
Have we considered, we've got some renovations there. This is a lot of money, in a financial crunch. Have we considered demolishing or just being done with some of these buildings? I mean, that's got to be on the table too, before we make a $50-some-odd million investment in it and reallocating those, the personnel and the research there to another building. I mean, we got extra space in some places we don't. I mean, have we tried to do that before we ask for $50 million?
So that's a great question, and that's what's in for the MU project. A big part of that is actually getting funding to tear down some of our space. We've talked about, and with all 4 campuses, and we talked in April about this, and as we look with the group that we're going to get together, that Chairman Graham's talked about, I think one of the things we have to consider is we've talked about this concept of a no new net square footage policy. And so it doesn't mean we're not going to build new buildings, but it also means if we're looking to build a new building, we ought to be looking to take some of our other space offline. So absolutely, and UMSL's whole plan is doing what you're indicating.
And we're talking nearly $100 million in renovating new facilities when we could potentially, do some different things.
And a big part of that $100 million isn't renovation. Some of that's just tear down.
Okay. Are we able to, and maybe this is a question for Moon or for our legal counsel, are we able to, as a board, reevaluate this list of what we're asking the legislature at this point in time? This might upset some people, but still, as of today, these might not be our priorities in what we're asking for $350 million. Seems like we should be able to maybe sit down and reevaluate what we're actually asking for, because I'm not sure these are this board's priorities.
This is an action item. We have to have a vote on this, and nobody can make you vote yes.
Okay.
We have to submit it in July.
In July.
I want to be clear, though, by no means if the board were to approve this request, that we walk away from here saying, we're ready to go, we're going to move forward with these projects. Every 4-year institution in the state is going to submit a request for a project. And given the challenges the state faces and that we face, I'm not going to say that I'm overly optimistic that we're going to get funding for these capital projects.
Brian, could I ask, so I think you said over the last 15 years, we've had one capital,
Yeah, we got some bonding money. It helped us do Lafferty Hall. I think maybe part of the phase 1 of Spencer, phase 2 of Schrank, and Benton Stadler at UMSL.
so a few times in the last 15 years. But we're going to vote today to take these 4 projects to the legislature. Do we, echoes what Daryl's saying, I mean, do we prioritize these a little better and take fewer, or how does that work? Is UMSL going to go to the legislature and advocate for theirs, and UMKC for theirs, and MU? I mean, is there a concerted plan? Because if I was in the legislature, I'd be saying, all right, we can't do all this, but what do you really want us to do?
Well, I think all 4 years are going to be looking for core appropriations, and given the budget challenges we face, that's going to be the #1 priority, I believe, not just for us. I can't speak for the other 4 years, but I'd be surprised. And with capital, if there was money to fund it, great, but I think we also have to be realistic. It's going to be hard enough for us to just maintain what we have in terms of our core when it comes to our operating appropriations.
Any more questions, discussion? Shirley?
I guess my only discussion, you raised a good point, and I'm not involved in this process of picking these projects, but internally, I feel like we should have some independent campaign raising to support this transitional precision medicine complex, to show the capital that we feel that it's such a priority. We want them to give money, and we're out there actively raising money too. just to ask for 150 million, and I don't see a supported plan on how we're also working to get that, seems a little funny.
And I think that's what we would look to address through this committee. And I know in April I talked a little bit about this. Part of it is we start to look at capital. When state support's available, we'll view it as supplemental for capital projects. But we've got to shift our mindset. And you know, I don't think there's any one solution. It's to some extent looking at a no new net square footage policy. It's thinking about the possibility of a student fee for maintenance and repair. It's thinking about public-private partnerships. What can those provide? And also how can we leverage our own resources from the standpoint of we have a central bank that can provide some funding as well towards capital projects. But I think the mindset you're going to see us shift to is we're going to submit projects to the state, and we're going to start thinking about, you know, regardless of what support they can provide, how do we figure out how do we get those
When you
projects done?
put this in front of the state, maybe this is part of the task force, is this a ranking? Do you say, okay, state, we know that 243, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
So if you had to prioritize, we feel like this is the order in which you should prioritize? Do we explicitly say that?
Yeah, these are to represent what would be the priority project for the campuses.
So, given the state financial situation, for us to expect $243 million in support is going to be, in some ways, we know it's not going to materialize, at least at that level. So if these are our priorities, then we have to make a determination, how do we fund it one way or the other? And that's where philanthropy comes in. That's where we ask ourselves, where can we reallocate within the campuses and the system to realize these goals? Every one of these projects, with perhaps the exception of UMSL, really affect faculty recruitment and retention, which in turn affects student recruitment and retention. And if we have higher student recruitment and retention along with faculty, just in Mizzou's case, we can be growing our own revenue. And so it's a very important investment, and we have to start now with a strategic plan to say, here's how we plan to do it, given that the state may not be able to come up with the support at that level for all of these projects. So I think that's key.
Right, now, if I could ask one more question. So it's clear that, you know, this is the priorities for the capital appropriations. But do we have different priorities? Like, what if we get zero here? Does this become our priorities that we're going to try to fund, or do we have a different set of one per campus that we're planning on working on ourselves?
This is what we're going to work on.
This is it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good
Yep.
answer. Thank you. So this is the priority. We're going to get
Yeah.
as much as we can, and then we're going to have to try to figure out how to. Okay.
Exactly.
There's not two
But
lists.
I also want to be really clear that if you think I have a funding plan for how we're going to fund these internally right now, we
No, I get
don't.
it.
That's our
I get it.
challenge.
I get
So
it.
let me ask another question. Jeff? No, go ahead, please.
My point was, there's not two lists. There's not, here's what we're going to ask the state for, and here's what we're going to work on ourselves.
But we have that, we do have our auxiliary projects that have revenue streams they can pledge that we can bond against. I would think of those differently. And then we do have projects where if donors come through with that,
But
that
in
can
a
drive
way,
it.
I think that makes sense to think of them differently, but, you know, we need the donor support. I mean, and if it's an auxiliary project that provides revenue, I mean, maybe that moves up the list. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
asking, you know.
The likelihood of happening is higher. But what do you think our chances of getting anywhere close or even a single dollar for these projects?
Zero.
Then should we even make a request?
Let me ask that a little bit different way, because that's a question I was wondering about. It seems like we do this almost routinely because we think if we don't, we'll look bad. Would we increase our credibility in the years ahead if we selectively did this and maybe didn't make any request in a year when, I mean, we've been talking about an hour about something that's not going to happen, I think. And would we increase our credibility by doing it more selectively and really push for projects that we thought we might get some funding on, that had the sizzle and the sale that would convince the legislature that this really is a project that this campus or this part of the system needs.
Given that I just said I don't think we'll get any funding for these projects, I think it's something we'd have to think about because you're right, it's been kind of this routine list that we've submitted. Every other 4-year in the state's going to submit a routine list. If we wanted to not submit a list for this year, I'm looking at Beth, and I don't think that causes any problems for us.
If I can add one more thing. These projects are still high priority for the university system, and we're going to try to find a way to do it. But if we know that the state funds are not going to be there, for us to say, let's accelerate the fundraising and internal reallocation to get it started. And if the state is in a better financial position next year, then we can come back and ask based on where we were able to raise the funds. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, and if through this process priorities changed for next, I mean, this is an annual process. We could always submit a different request next year.
Historical perspective here, because we have through the years debated both in terms of capital requests as well as appropriation requests, whether we submit what we think we'll get or what we think we want. And there's one reason for submitting what you want, even though you're unlikely to get it, is it keeps in mind the things we think we need to function as a good university. A good example of why we might want to submit to this, even though we realize we won't get it, is that sometimes you have to ask several times and several years in a row before it ever comes to fruition. A good example is Benton Stadler, which was, I don't know how long we requested that, told no year after year after year. And finally, at some point, we finally got it, and we were able to at least say, we've requested this for 12 years. So there's arguments both sides, I understand, but historically, I think our approach has been to submit to the state what we think we need to illustrate what we think we need to function well as an excellent university, and keep asking until sometime.
No, and we saw the same thing with Laffrey Hall at MU. I think, Schrank Hall, if you've been in Schrank Hall, it's much the same way. So a lot of it's just saying, hey, these are big renovation needs we have on the campuses.
But these are, go ahead.
Yeah, and as I look at these, I'm not sure that these are the things that are going to make us look like a great system or a great university. I think the first project seems like it is. I'm not sure. I think there's other projects that we've discussed and that we're going to hear about later, that I think could outperform these in making us a great system or great universities within a system. I think submitting stuff like this, if we've only got funding once in 15 years, I think we're just losing credibility, just like Marcy said, each time we submit these type of things that we know won't get funded. And it would be nice, when we start talking about approving this or sending it to legislature, if there was some kind of metrics involved in what benefit or what value added these projects have, whether it's jobs, whether it's increases in our status in our AAU status or our rankings. And I'm not sure that, there's a couple of these that I think could increase that or improve that, but it's not shown in this chart that we're looking at here. And hopefully we're presenting that to the legislature with our request, and I think we might get more bang for our buck at that point in time if we're able to show some metrics on what this investment will what kind of outcomes we'll get from that investment. I'm not sure we're showing that here, at least.
So what this type of investment does more than anything is, as we talked about, and we talked about our FC&I, our facilities backlog, it allows us to take teaching and research space that we currently have that isn't in the shape it needs to be in to renovate it. So I think that is where some of these projects maybe aren't as exciting as building a new building, but it's also critical that we're not just looking at building new buildings because we're having a hard time funding the current space we have. So that's really when I look at these 4 projects, that's what we're trying to address. And I think Steve raised a good point. When we got the money from the bonding, what we were able to point back and say, look, we've been saying we needed significant renovations of Laffrey Hall. We needed significant renovations of Stadler. I mean, if you went into these buildings, they're not they're not in the shape that we would like them to be that great university that we want to be.
Let me suggest a couple things, and I actually think this makes some sense, but my natural conservatism likes to think about things before we jump off of ledges. Every other university will submit a capital improvement, and I don't think we're going to get any money, but we may have some hardy soul out there in legislative leadership who decides a bond issue might be good infrastructure. In fact, you might have a president who believes in infrastructure. I'm just saying. And you might have some federal flow-through funds. So, you know, where I don't think we're going to need money, I want everybody to think about if we don't approve a request and everybody else gets some federal money when the President Trump has his infrastructure bill. So I think we have to be realistic, but I think we have to be thoughtful. Now, the other thing is, I will say this in saying that, is I am hopeful that this is the last time that we will see this sort of presentation. I don't think the new board members fully realize what Curator Phillips was talking about and what Curator Graham is trying to address, is that we haven't really participated as a board in prioritizing anything. And if anyone says we did, we didn't. We just voted for stuff. And I'm hoping that we can come up with this task force and a new way of prioritizing. Now, I'm going on too long. It also seems to me, though, that we have to be careful, and we should have a global priority list that includes all sources, and then we break out who can be funded in making our final decisions. But we should be able to prioritize the buildings we need regardless of funds. Another thing is sometimes chasing funds doesn't work good. You know, there are auxiliary services which are more likely to get funded. Dorms are an example. How's that working out for Mizzou? You have to be very strategic, and I'm hoping that the task force can come up with an idea to give us more of a priority list and then choose about funding, but that's just my hope. But I will urge a note of caution. I can see why the board members feel like that, but for us to be the only institution that does not submit a capital request, the chances really aren't zero. They might be 0.0001, but
Is there a way of acknowledging the dramatic effect of recognizing that this can't happen, or 0.001, and yet preserving that percentage? You mentioned request as opposed to something else. I can't remember what the phrase was, but do you have to have a formal request in order to?
there is a state deadline for a formal request.
For a formal request?
Yeah.
Yep.
So if I could just urge whatever everybody wants to do, but what we should do is make a plan, a timeline, change the way we do this moving forward. But it seems to me a little precipitous to think we have omnipotent knowledge of these kind of things. And we would hate to be the board that was the one board in the state that cried uncle too soon.
So, those are good thoughts. I do end up with a question here. I trust that this is something that came to us because the Finance Committee and administration together
I'm sorry, John.
That's right. I trust that this prioritization came from administration, came through committee, and is a recommendation based on what it was for, which was state capital appropriation. Is that
Well, I don't know what committee. I mean,
your
again,
committee?
well, that's what we're doing right now. That's the problem, is I hope we vet these things much differently in the future.
Okay.
So to answer your question, the projects are scored, and they're based on need. I think if you go to, although I think it was in the April mailing, I don't have that information, but to Curator Chapman's earlier question, if you look at 4-2, there is an estimate on the impact of the overall economy, what type of jobs it might generate for each project.
Does it take into account patron and donor contributions to the cost?
No.
Okay, so it doesn't. I think it would be better in the future if instead of putting state requests, we had donor support, because that's what we're going to have to depend on for the next several years, instead of state requests for direct funding as opposed to bonding authority. My question is this. I'm going to say that I personally, based on what's been presented to us, my personal view today is that the first one is the most important to the university, that we have to move forward in supporting our research function on the flagship campus in order to maintain our AAU standing. And we're getting close to missing a window of opportunity. That doesn't mean that the others that are there aren't important, or others that have major donor support aren't important. So that's my priority. My question is this. We vote on this today, and let's say we don't get funding from the state, and if others end up agreeing that that's huge, even though everybody has different interests on different other projects, how are we going to get that built?
So I think that's what I talked about earlier of we've got to look, there isn't one solution on it. I think philanthropy is one. One is what can we do to leverage our own resources through our central bank. I do think at some point we have to look at what auxiliaries can contribute. What can we do in terms of public-private partnerships? I mean, I'd love to sit here and tell you the state can't do it, here's the one solution that we can do. I think it's going to be a combination of all of those.
That's a major question as far as I'm concerned.
So the TPMC, the Translational Precision Medicine Complex, is the highest priority. If we want to keep AAU status, we have to grow engineering research, nursing, medicine research. That's going to be key. And for us, right now, we have to look at all options, including seeking federal funding for partnerships. If there are opportunities to work with Department of Defense or the VA, for example, so that they can contribute towards part of a building if we can pursue research that they're interested in. That'll help develop momentum for us to get additional philanthropic support. But at the same time, we have to make a decision as a university to say, what are we going to contribute to that effort? If we want to keep our AAU status, that's the most important project by far. And it's a collaboration with engineering, vet med, medicine, nursing, and health sciences. And obviously with the health center here, which is very successful. But let me just share a few words about the other projects that are there. They may not be directly as relevant to AAU research, but when we look at Spencer Chemistry and Biological Sciences, our students at UMKC are coming in this year with the average ACT of 26, the highest in the career. They're very interested in pre-med as well as STEM disciplines. And right now, they're having to study and work in laboratories that are substandard. In some cases, they're worse than what they've seen in some of their high schools. And so we do have to make investments one way or the other. At SNT, they currently have a 90,000 square foot deficit based on their master plan for both research as well as teaching. And their enrollment grew by about a factor of 2 over 15 years, but their physical infrastructure has remained the same. So they are really squeezed. And so the highest priority for AAU research is number 1, but the other 2 projects are also very high priority for us. If we want, as part of our mission, to provide our students with the best learning opportunity, and that's our mission, we need to make that kind of investment. So we have to find one way or the other to make these projects happen. That's key.
I would add to that this isn't the only list. A few years ago, the Missouri Legislature came up with the idea of a 50-50 match. And all of our campuses have been working on private donors coming up with projects that fit within those respective strategic plans. Some have been more successful than others. But that's not on this list, and in fact, this list doesn't recognize where those have been successful. And so as we recognize, and let's assume that because they can't fund this, they're not going to fund 50 projects in the foreseeable future. But that doesn't mean that you just look at this list. You have to look at what has already gained support, or you're going to really, really upset those who have banked on the state doing that kind of funding, which is totally different and isn't going to happen either. That's my point.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask this question? Do we know what the largest amount the legislature has appropriated on the MU campus for capital improvements over the last 10 or 15 years? What's the largest amount?
Well, it would have been what did we get out of that bond issue?
I'm going to have
We get 80?
Vice Chancellor Ward, what did we get from Lafferty Hall?
38 million?
Yeah.
Okay. What if we just changed our request of the state to somewhere around 40 million, knowing that we're probably not going to get more than that if we get that much?
Yeah,
But
that's
wouldn't
a
that
very-
be more logical than asking for 100 and still not getting anything?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, we know we're going to have to raise money elsewhere. Why not put something in that at least people look at and say, well, I understand what they're trying to do, and I know that's an important building, but they want $100 million. Why not go for 40 or something in that nature?
Ryan, when is the date? When's the drop dead date on this?
I'm looking at, Beth, what's our actual drop dead date?
We just got an email extending it to, I think it's August 7th.
Okay, so I thought it was July.
What? Can I make let me ask a question of the chairman and a question of the president, because I don't want to put words in your mouth or pin you down, but I believe from our conversations that you are committed to a board review of how we handle capital appropriations and
Yes,
starting
absolutely.
that immediately.
Absolutely.
So,
In fact, the committee's already appointed. You got an email a
okay.
little while ago.
Okay. So, he's trying to keep up with moon speed. That's what's going on right now. So, if we have that commitment as the board, I'd like to think about it, that we're going to be moving forward, and the risk that we take, even though it's 1.0001%, it may be a fat tail. We don't know. Dr. Choi, how would you feel like adjourning this, maybe cutting this back, but proceeding thoughtfully before we just say no without thinking of all the ramifications?
That would be a good plan.
Okay.
That would be a good plan. For us to do this between now and middle of July, I think would be a good idea.
And that means, too, we might need a meeting, but we have the board retreat coming up, and we
That's
should
right.
just
We,
give out a
we,
notice.
we have a meeting planned for the second day of the board retreat, so we could put that on the agenda.
Yes.
If it's the consensus of the board, then I'm not going to ask for a motion. Does anybody have a
David, can
problem with that?
We don't need a motion on that. Jeff?
Well, could I add, I want to, if we're going to delay this a little bit, you mentioned auxiliary projects. Just, do any of those that have some other revenue in other ways, would any of those make that list? Because I believe we do need to make an ask, clearly. We've got to ask, right? All four have to ask, whether it's large amount, medium amount, we do have to ask. But I believe the process, as we change this process, I think the other process we should consider looking at is, okay, we get a yes, hopefully we get a yes here. It's a long shot probably, but then we need to think about, if these are really our priorities, how are we going to get them done? And we get very serious about the fundraising, right? Or the naming rights and reserves and all those things. But I feel like we should just, if they're a priority, we should figure out how to get them done. So.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd also, it'd be great if we could get an answer too, whether it's state law or something that we've just agreed to as a system where each campus gets to submit a request, or whether we're just gonna, prioritize by system or prioritize by campus. It'd be great if we could find that
And I
out.
think a lot of things, I'd defer to the chairman on this. We can consider having informational meeting and doing it in public, but doing it by, we have a lot of ways, yet we can
No,
run
this
through
is,
these.
this has been a great discussion, one of the better discussions we've had. We do have some more business.
Right, so that's what I was gonna say. I do not intend to ask for a motion on this at this
I
time.
don't think we need it.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan, very much. And I appreciate very much your efforts on this. And
Yeah,
and for the members of the board, Ryan has actually put in significant work and thought into a better way to handle capital requests and capital improvements. And so he's put a lot of effort into this.
And we will, I'll get the rule with the state on submitting one project per campus out to the board.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. We have one more, well, we have, yeah, just one information item, and he'll introduce it and what he's setting it up, but I particularly enjoy this one. This is asset allocation, and I think Treasurer Tom Richards, is Tom here? Did we run him
Tom's right
off?
behind you, he's coming up.
Curator Steelman, I need to recuse myself again.
Right, I understand. I hope you can solve that problem. I'm working on it.
Now everybody's going to wonder what it is.
Yeah. And in addition, Tom's got a co-presenter here who I think the board will very much enjoy, and he has a particularly significant issue. This is just an information item, but it gives us some information. We will be casting a vote on it in the future.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Let me first start off with some good news. I'm here to talk about the retirement plan, and we'll get into detail with our presenter in just a second. But the good news first is that we have a retirement plan relative to public peer pensions that's very well funded. And there are a lot of reasons for that. This board has always made it a priority to do the right thing, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today, is to talk to you about some important things that we need to think about. The last data for which we have peer information from other public plans at the state and local level, for comparative purposes, our pension fund was funded at an 88% level versus the peer group of 72%. So 72% was the median of that peer group. So we're in a good place from that respect. In terms of our performance this year, which we'll be back in October to talk in more detail, but through the end of May, the returns on the retirement plan are about 12.5%. The last point that we had peer data on that was December 31st. Our performance was in the top quartile of peers there. So we're in good shape there. What we're really here to talk about is the future going forward and some things that we're concerned about. And it relates to the return assumption of the pension plan, which is currently 7.75%, which is on the high side. And we have some concerns about our ability or anyone's ability to generate those kinds of returns going forward. And the purpose of the presentation is talk about that, why that's the case, and what some of the things may be that we can do about that proactively. But again, we're starting from a position of strength. We're well-funded, and we are well-funded because we've done things the right way. And that encompasses this discussion today in terms of being very proactive, transparent, and honest about the issues that we face so that we can arm the board with the information that you need to make decisions that will need to be made. Just in general, and we're going to talk about this going forward, over the next probably 2 years. If you think about a retirement plan, a defined benefit plan in a very simplified sense, over the lifespan of the plan, you have a very simple equation. Your contributions going in plus your investment income equals the amount of benefits that you're going to pay out over the life of the plan. The point of bringing this up is just to specify, we're here today just to talk about the investment income component of that equation. There may be occasions to talk about the other two pieces, but today's purpose is to talk about investment income and seeing what we can do to optimize that outcome. In terms of the timeline, which we shared with the board in the board summary and the materials, again, today we're talking about investment income. We will begin to lay the groundwork today in terms of changes to the investment portfolio, which we think will be beneficial to the retirement plan. Our objective would be to come back to the board at the September meeting with specific recommendations for changes, and we would ask for board approval at that time. Between now and the September meeting, our plan would be to meet with board members in maybe more in one-on-one meetings to go into more detail to talk about this further. At the December board meeting, we may be coming back to the board to talk to you more about the pension plan itself and the actuarial assumptions, because if we don't feel that we can earn the 7.75% going forward, that has implications for the actuarial modeling of the plan. And so that would be kind of the timeline that we've laid out. But again, just going back to the high level, we are very well funded relative to peers, and we're able to talk about this from a relative position of strength. We want to maintain that, though, which is why we're here to talk about something that's very serious and an issue that's facing all pension plans across the country. I want to introduce Phil Doran from Bridgewater. And just a note, Bridgewater Associates is one of our key strategic partners that we work with on the investment side. They have tremendous intellectual, technological, and modeling resources. And most of the time we talk to them, it's actually not about what we invest with them, but they're good partners. They have about 300 clients globally, and we're one of them, and we're fortunate to have a partner that's willing to help us think about big issues and serious problems. So with that, I want to turn this over to Phil and get right into the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and I just wanted to thank the board for having us in today and letting us be part of the process to talk about what is a really important issue. Just stepping back for a second, when we look out, we'd say that public pensions and defined benefit pensions in general are a critical piece of retirement savings. And as Tom mentioned, when we look at the university plan, we'd say that it's in a much better position than many. But the thing that will keep it there, in our view, and the thing that's really important to do is to actually tackle challenges in a way that's proactive, forward-leaning, and transparent. And when we look out in the future, we actually see a very challenging environment, particularly for the investment income piece, where the future, the next 10 years of returns, look very, very different than what was either experienced in the last 10 or in really the 30 or 40 years before that. And so it's really standing here as partners, and I'm honored to be representing Bridgewater because it's been a big team that have been working together with the Treasurer's office here and lots of folks at the university to really do a good job, or as good of a job, at stress testing, looking at where the plan stands, and considering some levers, particularly around investment allocation decisions, that could increase the chance of success and significantly cut back some of the worst outcomes that are possible when running a pension. And so there are really three parts to what I wanted to cover today. The first is I really wanted to share with you the whys behind the investment challenges that we see ahead. The second thing I wanted to do is take a look at where the plan stands and introduce some of the frameworks of stress testing that we find very useful. And then the third is just to look at some different things on the investment income and asset allocation front, particularly different alternatives for achieving returns in the pension plan and what that could mean for the funded status and any unfunded liabilities in the future. I, of course, invite questions from anyone on the board at any point. When we look at the current environment, the challenge that we see is that we really believe that the total returns that are going to be earned by savers of all kinds over the next 10 years are likely to be historically low. And for us, this is not separate, but actually directly related to the 2008 crisis and what we call the secular deleveraging pressures and the necessary policy response. And the reason that that creates challenges is that when you look at the objective of any pension plan, it's to earn a return. And if you miss that return, the ability to catch up actually becomes harder and harder and harder. And so the challenge for investors of all stripes who have spending plans, who have liabilities, who have payments that need to be made based on the expectation of higher return than what might be likely is a big challenge to address. So when I say that we're going to see low returns, where that comes from really comes back to the environment. And we'd say that the defining environment, I'm on page 5, of the last decade has really been the shift from a 60-year period where debt has been rising relative to income. There's a chart of that, the blue line. Effectively, from the end of World War II until 2008, you had debt higher and higher and higher, and the transition happened in 2008 for debt actually going lower and lower and lower. And now the reason that that matters is that GDP, or the economy, is just spending. And in order to spend money, you need to get money. And you can get money from earning it, or you can get money from borrowing it. And when someone gets more money from borrowing, that allows them to spend more, which allows someone to earn more. So it's very self-reinforcing on the upside. It's also very self-reinforcing on the downside. And so in 2008, when something very different happened from anything that we've really experienced going back to the 1930s, it really required a response. Because if people couldn't get money to spend from borrowing anymore, that had to be replaced, or the economy had to shrink. And so what you saw is that as a result of the deleveraging, as a result of that blue line coming down, you saw two things happen. One is that interest rates were cut all the way to zero, with the hopes that at low interest rates, you could actually encourage more borrowing from the people who might have more room. But even that wasn't enough. Debts were just too high. And so the second thing that the central bank did, which was a little bit unpopular, a little bit controversial, and not without sort of some negative side effects, but we think ultimately necessary, is that they actually used the power of their printing press to print money, with the idea that if you print money, that gray line, you could actually offset some of the decline in credit. Now, 8 years forward, what we've seen is that that action has had some positive effects. It's had some positive effects on the economy. It's brought the unemployment rate back down. It's one of the reasons that in the press you read about the Fed saying, we're actually going to pull back some of this support. But what we'd say is that while this had a pretty positive effect on the economy, it had a much bigger impact. Money printing had a much bigger impact on the asset markets. And this graph is sort of one of the ways that sort of we want to represent to you what's happened over the last 8 years, what's produced some very, very good returns for the pension plan and for investors in general, and why on a going forward basis that seems highly unlikely to continue. And so what the graphic is showing you along the bottom axis are a couple of different assets that you can hold. The leftmost is just cash, sort of a T-bill or a bank deposit. As you move further to the right, you get into bonds where you've locked up your money for some period of time, and then further out you get riskier assets like equities. And then on the vertical scale, what we're showing is the return, the expected return of those assets. And so the first step here, when central banks push down the interest rate to zero, you see that the black line that says normal actually shifts down to today. So the return of cash, which had been something like 5% prior to the crisis, is now zero. And then what you've seen is that 8 years of successive printing, of printing money to buy assets, of printing money to buy mortgage bonds, what that's done is it's actually pushed down the forward-looking returns of all the assets by pushing their prices up. One different way of representing that is you could look at the actual yield that you could earn on bonds. So you used to be able to earn a 5 or a 6% yield by buying a 10-year bond, and that's fallen to about 2%. Now, as that's actually happened, the price of the bond that you were holding has gone up a lot, but the yield that you're going to earn going forward has come down. And the same thing has really happened in the equity market. Equities used to be priced in 2009 such that if you got normal economic outcomes, the market could give you 9 or 10% a year. But after a doubling and then an almost doubling again of the market from its 2009 levels, you're at the position where the forward-looking returns have come down as the price you're paying for the stocks has gone up. I think one of the most evocative pictures that we have, and we have the benefit of looking at 100 years of market return data to do this, that in our mind leads to one very clear message, which is that the experience of the last 8 or 9 years is highly, highly unlikely to be repeated. And so what we're showing here is every one of these gray lines, we call it a spaghetti chart, every strand of spaghetti really represents one 9-year period or 8-year period for the returns of a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. And the red line that's highlighted is the experience of the last 8 years. I know it's a little bit hard to see, maybe in the presentation it's a little bit easier to see, but there are actually only 3 or 4 periods over the last 100 years that have been better for a 60% stock and 40% bond portfolio than what we've seen over the last 8. One was the 8-year period ending March of 2000, so the tech bubble. And the other two were periods in the immediate aftermath of the United States winning the Second World War after having it not be fought on their soil. And so which one doesn't seem to align to the others? To us, it seems like the last 8 years doesn't look like we just won a world war. Instead, what it looks like to us is the natural consequence of liquidity and lower interest rates pushing down the future returns, but pushing up the price of the assets that are held. Just by context, the returns that we've seen over the last 8 years, the red line, are about twice, a little bit more than twice, the returns of the blue line, which are the average. And one of the things that we've also seen is that when you get an outcome like the red, it's much more likely than not that the following 10 years actually look below the blue, because you've effectively bid up assets or paying more for the same thing, which means that there's less room to outperform in the future. So one last image on the challenge of earning returns comes here. You can dissect any portfolio, any return stream, into 3 pieces. The return that you get from cash, which is the return that you get without taking any risk at all. The return that you get from the assets that you hold, the risk that you take in the markets. That's the second column that we call strategic asset allocation. And then the third are extra returns that you can get from skill. Basically picking what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, who's a good manager, who's a bad manager. And what you see in the first 2 boxes is one certainty and one thing that you can have a high degree of confidence. The 5.2% that was earned historically from cash is highly, highly likely to be closer to 1.3. The 4.2 that you got in excess of just holding your money in the bank or in T-bills that you got from a 60-40 portfolio, which was 4.2 over the last 50 years, 4.2 seems like a pretty safe bet for as good as it's going to get over the next 10 years, and there's some room lower. And so whereas a 60-40 stock bond portfolio since 1970 gave you that 9.4, on a forward-looking basis, with cash where it is, and even the same performance above cash, which could be charitable, you're looking at more like a 5.5% return. So when we apply this reality of just the market you're inheriting, the returns you're likely to earn, to the challenge of running a pension plan, we really come back to 3 questions that are really meant to, in a common sense way, reflect the reality of what a pension fund does. And the 3 questions are: first, what returns are required in order to make the payments that you've promised? You have a pile of money today, you have a plan for contributions, and you have payments out in the future. What return do you need on the money you have today to make those payments? And then the second question is, well, what returns can you actually achieve from the asset allocation that you hold and from the skill that you think you have? And then the third is really, how will losses, how will the risk that you have to take along the way in order to make that return affect you? And then the other concept that we'll keep on coming back to is this notion of what we call a return gap, which is just the difference between the returns that are required and the returns that you think are achievable. And what we find is that the longer or the larger the return gap exists, the more and more vulnerable the portfolio is to a period of underperformance, and the more and more likely it is that you get sucked into a pretty unsustainable spiral of losses that erode your corpus, that then mean that you need to make even higher and higher and more unachievable returns in the future. And so the main thing that we'd say is that having a game plan to control that return gap, to stare at it clinically and think about ways to minimize it, and having guardrails in place, which the plan already has, in order to prevent it from getting out of control, is critically important. So when we go through the stress test, we're going to really refer back to those 3 questions. I'm probably going to move past these observations and just go to them straight in the interest of time. So question 1. What's the required return of the plan? Well, your challenge, you could read this in the second bullet point, is to make roughly $20 billion of payments over the next 60 years, with $3 billion of assets today and about $1 billion of planned contributions. And so the question is, how do you turn 4.2 into 19.5? And if you solve for the return that you need in order to make the payments when you've promised, the result is that you need an 8% required return. Just for those who might know or recall that the discount rate on the plan or the return for the discount rate is 7.75, the reason that the return is a little bit higher that's required than the 7.75 is that, as Tom said, that would be true, 775, if you were at 100% funding. The fact that you're a little bit below that, though in better shape than many, actually pushes up the returns that you need to make good on the promises in the future. Now, turning to question 2, what's the achievable return of the portfolio? Well, on the left, we just show, but I think it's beyond the scope of the discussion here to go deeply into it, the allocation in terms of where the dollars of the pension portfolio are invested. On the right, we look at where the risk of the portfolio is. And up top, we look at the kinds of environments where you're likely to get better or worse than average returns. But when we boil it down with a 1.3% return from cash, a pretty low starting point, the likely achievable return of the plan as it currently is allocated is something like 6.8. We then look and say, well, how much risk do you need to take in order to get that 6.8? Because one of the cruel things about pension math and managing a pension is that that 8% required return is 8% every month, every quarter, every year. It doesn't vary. Whereas that 6.8% achievable return is actually 6.8 plus or minus something. As Tom just said, the last year was a pretty good one, or is shaping up to be a pretty good one at 12.5. But when we look historically at this portfolio, you sometimes see really bad periods. You sometimes see 3-year periods where the portfolio, instead of making 8% a year or 6.8% a year, actually loses 7 or 8% a year for 3 years. And so where does all of this leave you? Where does the required return, the achievable return, and the risk that you're taking leave you? Well, it's all probabilistic, but when we look at it, we would say that doing nothing, letting the current plan, which has put you in a pretty good position relative to peers, letting that run leaves you with about a 1 in 3 chance of meeting the required return. That's the odds of meeting the 8%. And then the other point of it that I think is pretty important is that when those returns come can matter a lot. Because the plan is contractually paying out part of its corpus, part of the assets that you have today to retirees, bad returns today can create a very negative compounding spiral. Good returns today, and the power of compounding can actually bring in the opposite direction. It's a pretty interesting, albeit a little bit of a geeky point, but in the example on the left, you have a pension plan that needs to make 7.5%, and over 40 years they actually make 7.5%. But you get good returns at the beginning, and then you get bad returns towards the middle and the end. In the bottom, you'd see the funding ratio of that plan. If it starts at 1, because you're getting good returns, more than you need, you actually get the virtuous benefits of compounding, and the funding ratio goes all the way up to 2.5, so more than fully funded. On the right, you have the exact same return streams, but inverted. So instead of the good returns coming at the beginning, the good returns come at the end and the bad returns come at the beginning. Still gets you to that 7.5%. But because you're making payments to retirees along the way, and your asset base is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and those payments keep on coming, with the same returns, you start at a 1 funding ratio, and by year 20, you actually run out of money. So you can't even benefit from the good returns that come. So where that all leaves you is that being in a position where you're forward-leaning, proactive, and not letting problems grow to the point at which you're spiraling out of control is one of the main things that you can do to prevent those very bad outcomes from happening. And we would say that the contribution policy that already exists on the university plan is critical in lessening the impact of losses and preventing the real negative spiraling from reaching it out of control. Now, the analysis that I'm going to show here, which we keep on coming back to as we look at some different asset allocations, is a little bit complex, but I'm going to try to explain it, and then once we get it once, it'll be easier to look back at the others. On the left, what we're showing is the funding ratio of the plan at starting point, so about that 85, 88% that Tom mentioned. And each of the gray spaghetti strands, kind of like that other chart, is a 15-year period that was experienced over the last 100 years of a portfolio with your current asset allocation and the structure of the liabilities or payments that needs to be made. So you can think about it as, for every period since 1925, we've looked at the returns of your assets, the payments of the liabilities, and then we recalculated at each point what your funding ratio would do. And so what you see is that there's a really, really wide range to the outcomes that could have been experienced of the pension. The red, which is the median case, so 50th percentile, suggests that your funding ratio will stay with the current asset allocation around 85%. In the 20th percentile, so the worst 20% of outcomes, that funding ratio will actually fall into the low 70s. And then in about 40%, 45% of cases, you'll hit the positive effects of compounding, the returns will be good, and you'll end the period fully funded. On the right, we're doing the exact same analysis, current portfolio, current liabilities, current plan, except instead of looking at the funded ratio, we're actually looking at the gap between where your assets stand and what fully funded would be. And so that gap starts today at around $600 million, and you see that in the median case, it ends up also at around $600 million. In the 20th percentile case, in the case where you get one of the worst 20% outcomes, that gap can actually grow to over $1.5 billion. So a lot of this exercise, a lot of the stress testing and looking at the range as opposed to just the center point is about saying, what can I do to minimize the impact of ever getting to the point where I'm in such deficit? What can I do either through my asset allocation, which is mainly what we're going to talk about today, or through the other levers of contributions and benefits in order to structure something that really serves to narrow the range and particularly cut off the very, very bad impacts on the bottom. So in this section, we're going to look at a couple of different alternatives for what asset mixes can be held and how they perform around that exact same stress test. So the median, the 20th percentile, and the range around that. And the three that we chose for discussion today and for your consideration, one is just taking a 60%, 40% stock bond portfolio. So a passive stock bond portfolio. The second is actually taking the existing asset allocation of the pension plan. And the third is looking at what really is just a concept portfolio, but a concept portfolio that tries, through its allocations, in order to get more return through more diversification and more balance to what kind of environments the portfolio will do well in versus poorly in. And so let's just talk a little bit about the portfolios for a second and what we even mean by a balanced portfolio versus a less balanced portfolio, and then we'll turn to the results. So on the left, what we're showing is a 60-40 stock bond portfolio. And what you'll probably see from the pie chart is the red is equities and the blue is bonds, but the red doesn't look like 60% of the pie. The risk looks like 90% of the pie, and the reason for that is that it is just a truth that it's the risk of the portfolio that drives the outcomes and not where the capital is. And so even though from a capital perspective, the pie of a 60-40 will look much more balanced, because equities can move up or down 30% or 40% in a given year, but bonds are much less volatile. They move around a little bit, but much less. The risk of equities going up and down tends to dominate the risk, dominate the return, and dominate the outcome of a 60-40 portfolio. And then on the bottom, what we're showing is if you think about the kinds of environments that an equity portfolio or a mostly equity portfolio will do well in versus poorly in, it's pretty simple. An equity portfolio will do well when the economy is running hot and doing a lot better than people expected. And so the amount of risk to the economy doing better is represented by the yellow relative to the amount of risk in the portfolio that will do well if the economy is running worse, which is the blue. An equity portfolio with some bonds will also tend to do very well when inflation is under control. So as inflation is coming down, as everything is under control, that portfolio tends to do pretty well. When inflation's moving the other direction, to the upside, it actually does a lot worse. And so the green represents the amount of risk that you have to a falling inflation environment, and red would be the amount of risk that you have allocated to do well in a rising inflation environment. And so in some ways, this mostly equity risk portfolio with some bonds in it will do very well in environments where growth is good and where inflation is stable and falling. And it'll do really poorly in environments where growth is falling and inflation is rising. And you could see that historically. And so the center point of expectations, looking at all the possible outcomes that you could see and looking at the returns that you think you can get, we would say that a 60-40 portfolio has something like a 4.5% expected future return. So 1 from cash, 3 to 3.5 from returns in excess of cash. The current portfolio that's adopted, what you'll see is that there's a lot less red, so there's much more diversification of risk away from just equities. It includes allocations to things like real estate. It includes an allocation to things like commodities, to inflation-linked bonds, to high-yield bonds, which really diversify that exposure. So as opposed to the environments being all yellow and all green, you actually see that there's some red, because there are parts of that portfolio that will do well if inflation rises. You'll see the similar amount of blue, which is the protection that you get if growth is bad. And we would say that that portfolio, when we look at the wide range of outcomes, when we look at history, when we stress test that, we think that the current portfolio is good for something like 6.5% to 7% returns going forward. So 1% plus 5.5% to 6%. The concept portfolio that we put on the right is one where we've actually further reduced the reliance on equity risk and have increased the reliance on other forms of risk and return in order to get you more return, and more return in the kinds of environments that a very equity-heavy portfolio might suffer in. And so you could see there's more red, there's more blue, there's more balance, and we think that that portfolio can actually get you more like a 7.5% return going forward with a comparable amount of risk. And so there's a lot of work that can be done, and there's a lot of important work in thinking about asset allocations. These are just 3, but then going back to the same notion of stress testing that we had seen, the same spaghetti analysis using the 3 portfolios, you could see both the center point and the range of how those different alternatives would have fared. I'm probably, just in the interest of time, going to skip to show the perspective in terms of the funding gap. So I'm on page 23. So with the 60-40 portfolio on the left, what you see is that in 62% of periods, so in 62% of the 100-year history, of the 15-year periods that we looked at, you end up with a lower funding ratio than the one that you started with. Simply because you're just not making that 8% required return. There's some cases where you actually catch the returns in the right sequence and in the right quantity that leave you fully funded. It's about a quarter of the time. And one metric that I think is pretty interesting is if you just look at the percent of outcomes, the percent of all those gray lines where the funding ratio dips below a 0.75, it's almost 80%. Now, the contribution strategy that you have in place, the fact that you look at the underfunded liability and actually remediate that in a way that's been put into place, is the reason that none of these outcomes actually ever go to zero, but you still see some pretty adverse outcomes. The center case is the current portfolio, and what you actually see in all of these is that the range, particularly on the bottom end, tends to get a little bit less extreme, and the red line, which is the center point, the median outcome, tends to get a little bit higher. And so the gap that starts at $600 million with the current portfolio, you've already seen this, ends at around $600 million in the median case. In the more balanced alternative, the gap, which starts at $600 million, ends around fully funded with no gap. There still are risky outcomes. There still are bad outcomes for that more balanced portfolio, but even the periods where you end up with worse returns tend to be less bad than the returns of a passive 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio, or than the current portfolio. And the reason for that is you're just upping your chances through higher returns of escaping the negative spiral, and upping your chances through higher returns and more consistency of actually achieving that positive effect of compounding on your liabilities. The final thing that we did, and Tom was very clear that in this conversation we're mostly talking about the investment challenges as well as the possible investment responses to the place that you're at, in order to just roughly quantify, to provide a number and some perspective on what these different alternatives could mean for you, What we actually did is we kind of said, how much more in annual contributions would you need to have to make the spaghettis of the existing portfolio look like the spaghetti of the more balanced portfolio? And so the existing portfolio is on the left. You've seen that image a couple of times. A $600 million gap basically ends at $600 million. If you added $25 million a year of contributions, that $600 million gap becomes around fully funded in the median case. In the adverse case, it still leaves you underfunded, but when you actually compare that to the next page, where you have the current portfolio, that same picture on the left, and you have the more balanced alternative portfolio, the more balanced alternative, that higher return through more diversification, leaves you in a comparable spot at the end of 15 years as contributing something on the order of $25 million a year. So with that, I'd really leave it up to you. I'd open it up to questions, but just leave you with the message that returns from investment income are really likely to be very, very low. There are no sure things in investing, but it is pretty sure that after an incredible run where yields have fallen and where prices have gone up, that it's very unlikely to be repeated, that path dependency matters. It's not just about where you end up, it's about the path along the way. And so the things that you can do in terms of all three of those pieces of return, investment income, contributions from employer and employee, and benefits, are important components in ensuring that you maximize the odds of achieving success and don't end up in the position where the problems become so large that they become too large to rectify. Thank you.
Any questions? I hope there are, and you take advantage of him being here. There'll be a vote in September, and the vote might be one that's going to not be wholly popular. You did such a good job, nobody has any questions.
My comment would be that that was an excellent job of explaining a very complicated subject, so I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
No questions? We really do appreciate you coming in. We feel very fortunate to be able to call upon your expertise at Bridgewater. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We really appreciate the partnership, and as I said, it's a real honor to be here. Thank you.
That it, Tom? You got anything else? Nope. In that case, I will ask for a motion to adjourn the committee.
So moved. Second.
Curator Chapman? Curator Chapman?
Yes. The Governance Resource and Planning Committee.
No, we got to vote.
We have
You
to
gotta
adjourn
vote.
first.
I'm sorry.
Or we're overlapping, which would cause all sorts of problems.
That's right. Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Okay. All votes in favor.
Next item would be the Governance Resources and Planning Committee, and Curator Chapman, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Governance Resources and Planning Committee has one action item for today, which includes the approval of the 2017 Master Plan update. Vice Chancellor for Operations and Student Affairs, Mr. Gary Ward, will review the University of Missouri-Columbia Campus Master Plan and answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. So I listened to the earlier discussion on capital with great interest, and I'm hoping this will fill in a couple of the blanks. So this presentation is going to talk about stewardship and growth. We've got a dual priorities. In stewardship, we're going to talk about the efficient use of our space, and then for the second part of that, how we maintain our E&G facilities as a stewardship, as a steward. And then the second part of that priority is going to be our growth strategy. So here's our University of Missouri campus, and you can look in your handout there, and there has this map and then a lot of information with that. Cindy's handing those out now. So we have two different kinds of buildings on campus. We have E&G buildings, education and general buildings, and then we have auxiliary buildings. Auxiliary buildings are those that receive their funding from being a self-sustaining unit. They do not receive any state appropriation dollars or any tuition dollars. So they make their own money. That would be stuff like the hospital, athletics, residential life halls, dining halls, and parking structures and things like that. The buildings on this plan that's shown in gold is the E&G campus. That's education in general, and that's our administrative buildings, our teaching buildings, and our research buildings. They receive all their funding from state appropriations and student tuition. So just to give you an idea of what our current maintenance budget is, for fiscal year 17, it's $16.5 million. That $16.5 million represents 0.66% of the entire campus replacement value. So if you take the value of every single building, add them up, the E&G buildings, then 0.66% of that value would be $16.5 million. So just to give you a little bit of idea of our history of our E&G funding. So in 1998 and 1999, I'm told that's the best years we've had for funding of our maintenance budget. And that was 1.5% of the replacement value, the campus replacement value. What's important to note, though, is that on the proactive means of taking care of campus, 65% of that budget was used towards proactive maintenance. That's like changing the oil in your car. 35% was towards reactive maintenance. That's like replacing an engine because you did not change the oil in your car and you throw a rod. So of course you want to be more proactive in your maintenance position. So if you look down in 2016 on the bottom row, that's at 0.68% of our replacement value. That's where we were last year. And we only spent 39% towards proactive maintenance and 61% of reactive maintenance. And I want to show you what that does for us a little later. So we're very fortunate that we have some very good data. We have a facilities audit for each one of our E&G facilities, and that gives us 3 bits of information that we use to help with decision support. First, it gives us the replacement value for each one of our E&G buildings. Second, it gives us a detailed list of all the deficiencies in those buildings and a cost of the deficiencies. Once we have that replacement value and those deficiencies, we can come up with a ratio that's called an FCNI, Facility Condition Needs Index. So a Facility Condition Needs Index on this example of 0.68 means 68% of that building is deficient. So what's the goals? What should we want to be? We want to be at 0.30 or 30% or lower. We do not want to be real low because we do not want the University of Missouri to be known as the university that has the best pipes. We want to have the best programs, and our buildings need to be the minimal buildings they need to be to support the academic mission. So 0.30 is our goal, 30% or below. What we have found out through the years, though, in facilities management is if you have a facility that has an FCNI of 0.40 or greater, it is actually less expensive to completely gut that building or tear that building down and rebuild it, is try to just fix those individual deficiencies. So the recommendations based upon those facility audits and the information we had on the replacement values, we have a replacement value for our E&G campus of $2.5 billion. We show that we have $748 million worth of deferred maintenance, and that grows at $35 million a year. Now think about that when our maintenance budget is $16.5 million. So the current replacement value, or the recommendation for the budget of the current replacement value would be 2.04%. And we're currently at 0.64%, or $7.67. So again, this is our E&G campus in gold. This is our E&G campus showing buildings that are above 0.40% that need to be either completely gutted and renovated or torn down and replaced. So the entire campus E&G is 6.8 million gross square foot. We have 41 buildings that are above 0.40 FCNI, which means 31% of our E&G campus is in trouble. This is a slide, though, that concerns me. So what we project, if we stick with this current funding model of $2.52 per gross square foot, that in 2024, the campus will have an FCNI rating of 0.40 or greater. That does not mean that every single building is a 0.40. That means if you take the entire campus value, that $2.5 billion, and you take all the aggregate cost of the deficiencies, that's going to give us a 0.40 or greater FCNI. The problem with that is then we get into breakdown maintenance, and that's where we can have an impact on the academic mission if we start having breakdown maintenance. So that's one of the main things of our stewardship goals, to try to address this. This is looking at each one of the areas where those 41 buildings are at. It should be no surprise that 35% of our 0.40 and above buildings are in arts and sciences, largest college, largest number of buildings, and the oldest buildings that we have. And this goes on down through the list. So what do we want to do about it? So trying to be a good steward, we want to take a two-pronged approach to this. First and foremost, we want to really question our space utilization. Space utilization, public higher education, has not really been looked at in over 30 years. What we did 30 years ago is pretty much what we're doing today. So the idea is we need to become more efficient with the space that we already have. And if we could reduce the amount of space for certain functions, then that should allow us to be able to disregard, tear down, renovate, or something some of these older buildings, so we could put more people in less amount of space just because of technology and programs. As a result of that, we would take those leftover dollars, the dollars that we were spending on, the minimum dollars we were spending on these old buildings, and we can put that into the rest of the campus, automatically slowing down the deferred maintenance growth and slowing down the FCNI growth. So I want to take just a minute to talk a little bit about some auxiliary projects, or auxiliary project, and that is there's been questions about our Res Life halls, which is an auxiliary. They do not receive any funding from the state nor from student tuition. It's totally student fee based or student based. So we have 7 buildings in our portfolio that will be repurposed for the fall semester, and I'm going to go over each one of them briefly. So McDavid Hall, it's a 162-bed facility. It's 10 years old, and we have an unoccupied annual cost of $444,000. We put the engineering 2+2 program in there, and for fiscal year 18, we look to be able to make about $250,000, and as that program expands for fiscal year 19, we should be able to fiscally break even on McDavid Hall. Respect Hall, it's a 147-bed facility. It's 13 years old. It has a unoccupied cost of $540,000 a year, and we're looking at maybe a short-term lease with HES Extension or some other academic unit, giving us about $312,000 worth of revenue per year. Discovery Hall has a capacity of 218 beds, 13-year-old building, unoccupied cost of $682,000, and we're looking at using some type of housing or guest housing for this facility, and we don't exactly know what that's going to bring, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Similar to that will be Excellence Hall, capacity of 170 beds, 13 years old, $579,000 a year of unoccupied costs, and again, we're going to be looking at conference and guest housing for that.
And Gary, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No.
so these residence halls are empty at this moment, right? Or are these proposals to get them occupied, or what's the status right now?
So what we're going to do, I'm going to go over these 7 here in a little bit. I'll give you a little bit more information. These 7 halls are going to be unoccupied or repurposed for the fall semester. And we've got some strategies of what we want to do for that, but I want to show you some long-term and short-term strategies of how we're going to start filling these back up.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
With students or with the proposal?
With student, it's going to be short-term, it's going to be not with students, and long-term is going to be with students.
Okay.
Well, you'll see. There's one of them will not be with students.
Okay.
So, and I'll get to that, I think maybe even the next slide. So Responsibility Hall, we're looking at a short-term lease to MU Healthcare. And Responsibility has 184 beds. It has a $680,000 a year unoccupied cost. The anticipated revenue would be an occupied cost of $835,000, and that's a short-term lease to MU Healthcare. Here's the one I was talking about. Darrell, is Schurz Hall. It's a large building. It has 520 beds. It's 9 years. It was renovated in 2008. It has an unoccupied cost, and the difference between occupied and unoccupied costs would be the staffing that we got to put in there, and the energy dollars would be a little bit higher on an occupied building as well. This here is one of the buildings we want to repurpose to be an E&G facility. So if we go back to that earlier slides when we was talking about stewardship, if we could start tearing down these old high FCNI buildings, and at the same time reducing the amount of square footage needed per unit. So if we could take someone who was in 10,000 square foot and put it in 5,000 square foot and put it in a good building that has a low FCNI, better energy usage, we still have energy, maintenance, custodial, and landscaping dollars that we could save to put into the rest of the campus. This is where this building would come in, play on this. So this one would be a long-term taken out of the residential life portfolio and putting that into the E&G portfolio, and at the same time, tearing down more square footage than this building is. And then Center Hall is the last one. This is a 130-bed facility renovated in 2006. I guess it was built in 2006. $791,000 unoccupied costs. We are still looking at other revenue opportunities for that, short-term revenue opportunities for that. So very quickly, I want to talk about long and some short-term strategies. Long-term strategy is very simple. It's 3% growth rate. If we just see a 3% increase of the number of students that stay living on campus, that only equals in somewhere between 130 to 150 additional students per year, very modest growth rate, then we feel that we will break even in 2019, fiscally break even. Now, what's important about that is that returning student. We have never marketed to returning students. It's always been marketing to the freshman class. So we've never approached sophomores. We never really approached transfer students. In fact, my son transferred here just a few years ago and could not live on campus. So there's a great opportunity there because of our convenience, because of the location of these residential life halls, and just trying to change some of the processes we had before. For example, we will not require a meal plan. Sophomores don't want a meal plan. They want to be able to live on campus, but they want to eat wherever they want to eat. That hopefully will be attracting some additional students to stay on campus. If we can have just a 3% growth rate on the number of students staying in our res life halls, by 2021-22, we will max out our capacity of residential life halls. So that's good because in 19, it's good for a number of reasons. Number one, we have unoccupied costs we're going to be paying. But the second reason is in 2019, we're still 2 to 3 years away. That gives us plenty of time to take a look at what's going on another year from now to start putting together strategies or how we're going to handle that capacity issue in 2021 or 22.
And Gary, can you tell us what the basis is for that 3% growth rate that you have there? What did you base that growth rate on?
We went from something minimum that we thought we could actually do easily. That is a very modest growth rate. And I think Plim is going to be making a presentation a little later about the campus growth rate. We're talking more about the overall recruitment of additional students. Our thing is just trying to reach out to get students that are returning students, and also taking a look at the number of students in the past that have been turned down, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and some of the strategies that we're going to put in place for that as well. So, short-term strategies. We're going to look at scholarship opportunities. Okay, we've never done that before. We've never taken a look at scholarship opportunities for our res life halls. There's probably going to be a very big need for that. And then we talked about guest housing. Family weekend, we could rent some of those out, and this is back to those short-term strategies. We will only try right now for 17 and 18, coming up, fiscal year 18. The Eclipse, a lot of interest in that. Football weekends for parents. We just launched last night our website to where you can actually reserve a room for a home football game. Visiting scholars, NCAA athletic teams coming to campus can stay here. And then early August temporary housing. We've been asked that in the past. That's also for some of our upperclassmen. They don't want to leave in the summer, so can they stay there through the summer? So these are some of the short-term strategies. So the idea is to have short-term strategies with the long-term strategies. Short-term would just give us a revenue stream that hopefully in 2019 we project will be even. And then long-term would change the entire way that we're going to address and present our residential life halls instead of being just a freshman option only. Okay, now I want to turn to that other second dual priority, and that is our collaborative research effort.
I'll ask you just a quick question now. On these short-term strategies, it looks like some of them will work better than others. I assume we haven't had these in place up to now, right?
Never done it.
This is first time.
Right.
And the reason we're doing it, of course, we've got the vacant housing.
Right.
Okay. So this ought to work. Now, you came up with a 3% figure on trying to get the second-year students in. Why wasn't the number 2% or 4% or 5%? How'd you pick 3?
So we took a look at some past turndowns, you know, when we was having students that want to live on campus, and we discounted that down and took just a real conservative number in a matter of transfer students and also folks that have wanted to live on campus before that we denied.
So you had a group of people that understand this area come up with it. I
Yes.
mean, it wasn't just one man saying, hey, I think this is the right number.
Correct.
Let's plug this one
Correct.
in and hope it works.
Right. We think that's a fairly low estimate, what we think we'll see in returning. We've never done any kind of marketing for Res Life at all.
Very good.
And Gary, one other question, so freshmen are required to stay on campus, what's the rule? What about sophomores or?
So that's a good question, I appreciate that. In 1994, there was a policy that all freshmen have to live on campus. That has never been really enforced because we've never really had the capacity to even house a full freshman class. In fact, just 2 years ago, we were renting apartments off campus for our freshmen. So what we have to do, back onto this marketing, is we have to be very strategic in a matter of how we communicate with our students and our incoming students and their families on the benefits added to living on campus. We know a student will have better success and experience if they live on campus. There's research that proves that if you live on campus your freshman year, your retention rate's higher and your GPA's higher. That's what we want. We want that experience high and that success high. So what we're going to have to start doing now that we've always been kind of lackadaisical on it is we did not do emails or we did not do calls. We did not call and talk to our students or their families, let them know that we do have a university policy that you live here. It is a safer environment for our freshman students. Now, I've been asked, what are you going to do if they don't? We're still having discussions about that because we've not had to do that before. We still think that the benefits added is going to be enough to where all of our freshmen are going to realize and their families, this is where you really need to be for your freshman year.
Have we considered making that requirement for sophomores, or is that just out of the question?
Well, we did, and we looked at that. There was a couple of things on that. First, we don't have the capacity. We would immediately run out of capacity if we did that, because we have a little over 4,900 beds, so you take that freshman class and that sophomore class, it's too big. So we're kind of in the middle there. The second thing is talking to some of our enrollment management folks at this particular time, that was probably going to be a detriment to recruiting sophomore students to come back to the university for retention. As time goes on, that is going to be something we want to revisit maybe in a year or two.
I just wanted to say I appreciate you being creative and looking at these other avenues to recruit students or their families to stay in these vacant units. I think that's a really great job by you guys.
Appreciate that. Because one of the things, if we can get someone here to see our facilities, a family, for a football weekend that may have a junior or high school student, a senior student, I said, this is where you want to be. Yeah. So, yes, sir.
I understand that that some of the other opportunities for students to live close to campus, but not on campus, that are commercial, that are new buildings, that they're doing special incentives, waiver of fees. How much impact is that having, or do you anticipate it having as you introduce your own incentives? Do you think you can counteract that, or are they going to drain away what we might otherwise attract to come in?
I don't know if we have a quantitative analysis on that yet. We know that's having an impact on discussions. We know that it has an impact in the press. We know there's a lot of people talking about it. But what that tells us is we have to do a much better job of explaining that value added to our students, and that it's a safer alternative to be on campus, and that you will have an increased retention rate and a higher GPA. So we have to do differently on our marketing efforts than what we've done in the past.
So I should know the answer to this, but most of the newer construction are going to be more expensive, but you may not be able to attract them. But do we have differential pricing by the quality, the size, and the amenities in the regular dorms, the student housing?
I don't know the answer to that. Do we have differential pricing? It's yes, kinda.
Yes, kinda.
Yes, we do have differential pricing.
But
I just don't know enough about that to comment on it.
would it be helpful, because presumably we're mothballing or repurposing some of these because they're less desirable.
Right.
But there are students who would actually find them pretty desirable if they were at the right price.
Correct. Because if you notice in here, almost all of our facilities have either been renovated or they're rather new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a thought.
But the other thing we're trying to do, though, is we're going to start taking a very, very close look at the overall cost structure of every single service we provide to students.
and see, can we push that down? Can we push that down? Can we push that down lower? Because of that question.
Thanks.
So the second part of this presentation,
Gary, before you move.
sorry.
Before you move on to this topic, can you go to that slide where you have it broken down by college of how much space we're using on campus?
So this slide
Yeah.
is not the space they use on campus. This is the percentage of space for each one of the different entities on campus that has that .40 or greater facilities. You know, there's 41 buildings that have a .40 or greater. The majority of that square footage is within the College of Arts and Sciences.
Okay. I just want to know the reason, I want to know the reason for that. I was just wanted to dig a little bit deeper and have you explain why it's so out of proportion to some of the other colleges. Is there more kids enrolled, like, you know, whatever it is?
All of those. So Arts and Sciences is our largest college. It's going to have the most buildings. So they just have more buildings, arts and science buildings, than any other college. So that's one reason why you're going to see those types of numbers. The other thing is a lot of the things with the arts and sciences, those buildings are are STEM buildings and things like that. Those are the buildings that through the years have just not been updated. A lot of the white campus is in arts and sciences buildings, some of our historic buildings. So they have the oldest buildings and they have the most buildings. Then ag would be right there beside that. But this is not talking about the entire campus. This is only talking about those 41 buildings that need to be replaced or torn down.
Okay.
If I could ask a question, I appreciate what you're doing. I think it looks really great. Just due to the speed of the way things are changing right now, you're obviously updating the master plan about every 3 years. Does it make sense to do that every 2 years?
We update our master plan every year.
Oh, you do update it
Yeah, we've
every
been
year?
doing that for over 30 years.
Okay.
The reason being is just what you just said. There's two reasons for that. Number one, it keeps our data very up to date.
Okay.
So these facility audits, we get our audits done every 5 years. We do 20% a year of our entire E&G campus.
Okay.
It costs some money, but it allows us to do incredible decisions because of the decision support information we have.
I think that's great.
The other thing is because what you just said, higher education changes so quickly, and especially in this last decade, that having our master plan up to date and having that data allows us to be able to make very strategic maneuvers as we have to.
So you're doing that every year, but are you just presenting to us every 3
Yeah,
years?
Yep.
I wonder if it would make sense to bring that to the board more often.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Whatever the board's pleasure.
And
I'm here.
And Gary, do we have the money to do the recommended work that you're proposing here? I mean, are we?
So,
Yeah.
that's a great question. Let's go back to the earlier discussion that Vice President Rapp was talking about in the state appropriations. So there's a portfolio of solutions towards this E&G issue, and I want to go back to that. So each one of those buildings is shown in red as an E&G building. There's 41 of them there. They all have an FCNI of .40 or greater, which indicates they need to be completely gutted and renovated, or torn down and replaced, or just torn down. Some of these buildings have good bones, a very good structural system that a renovation would make more sense. Some of them. So that's going to be a capital need to do that, and that capital need is going to be higher because you're renovating, you're gutting and renovating a complete building. Some of the other buildings, there's nothing good about them at all except they're still standing. They need to be torn down. When you tear down those buildings, though, there's programs within those buildings. In the past, using the special utilization models that we would have had for the last 30 years, if someone had 15,000 square foot, that means you had to go find 15,000 square foot to put them in. What I'm proposing that we need to first and foremost take a look at our space utilization standards, just because of technology and some of the different ways that we're providing education and research, and say, okay, you have 15,000 square feet, let's put you down in 7,000 square foot, let's tear down this building and go over here in a good building and put you in there. That's another solution. Then the other thing is this whole academic review and whole program review, in a matter of if we have departments or we have things that end up going away, to reduce the amount of square footage, which allows us to be able to take these buildings out of our portfolio. And then the existing maintenance dollars and energy dollars can be spread out to the rest of the campus. So it's not a single solution, it is a portfolio of solutions towards this problem.
Where are we at in that process?
The first thing we want to do is do a space utilization analysis of the campus, and we're doing that right now. Okay, we actually started talking about this 3 years ago, and it had some traction. A lot of people say, yeah, it's a great idea, but when you have a budget crisis, it's no longer a great idea, it's a requirement. So we're doing that now. And then hopefully within a year from now, we will be able to come back to this board with some recommendations on some buildings we're going to take down.
Gary, along those lines, and the slide that Darrell asked you about earlier, I was interested in your comment about, 4% or below buildings are in pretty good shape. I was looking at the ratings category by the Association of Higher Education Facilities Officers, which I guess you're a member. It looks like if it's below 5%, they're considered good. 5 to 10% fair, but anything above 10% poor. And we had about 3, it looked like, on there who were above 10%.
So
does it make economic sense to try to renovate those buildings that are above 10%?
So we have these 40, I don't even know the number of percentage we have, at 10%. We've set our goal at 30%. And the reason why we've done that is because we are very conservative. And what we've tried to say is, the University of Missouri is not about the buildings. If we have a building that's 0.30 or 30%, it can do its job. It may not be the best, but it can do the job. It can support the teaching and support the research and can support that academic mission. We've been very conservative in that all along. I still think that is the right thing to do as a steward of public assets, is to have a higher threshold than a lower threshold, because it's not about the buildings.
Makes sense.
So no, you will not find most universities using a 30% model. They're going to be losing something different. But I got to tell you, APA, that association, is facilities managers. They're going to want a low number. I'm a steward. I want the number as high as it can possibly be, the minimum number that it can be, or the highest number it can be.
My question was more, when you get in that poor category, does it make sense to spend money to renovate when they're at that high level, above 10%?
So we do it strategically. That's the reason why it's great to have the audits. So every one of our audits has a very detailed list of those deficiencies. So we can go into a building and like surgically decide what are we going to repair that's going to get us the maximum life cycle out of that building. So if we have a building that has bad carpet and bad paint, we don't necessarily look at that, but we're going to look at our systems, or mechanical systems, electrical systems, and plumbing systems. So we're very strategic, but we have that information to be able to make those kind of decisions.
Thank you.
One more question, Gary. We've got, I believe, several $1 million invested in university research farms in mid-Missouri, or across the state for that matter. Why are we not analyzing, how we're utilizing our farms, our research facilities on those farms in this analysis? Because they have the same type of issues there.
The truth is, we haven't got to it. We should, we will. It just takes time and money. And we have been concentrating basically on the core campus. We started this effort a little over 10 years ago, and we do need to get out to the farm sometime. We've just not got there yet.
And Moon and I visited Bay Farm a couple of weeks ago, and we got comments there about, some of the things we need to do at Bradford Farm, and there were people threw out some good ideas. And I just want to make sure that they're getting treated, just like the folks on campus that have need capital improvements. They need some attention too, from what I heard. So,
I agree. It's a good steward to do that, to have that data to be able to make good decisions. So to move on, I want to get to the second part of our dual priorities. So the second part is growth of our research collaborative. And with this, I'm going to show you a short video that introduces the Translational Precision Medicine Complex.
In Columbia, the University of Missouri provides global leadership through a world-class education in medicine, animal science, engineering, business, law, education, and liberal arts, all from a single campus.
Now, as the world draws even closer together, it's time to find strengths in our differences and converge, to collaborate, to integrate, to innovate, and to change the world.
Bringing these aspirations to life, the Translational Precision Medicine Complex, where researchers and clinicians work together to create the next generation of biomedical solutions.
Great minds in engineering, medicine, and vet science share spaces where new ideas collide and can join.
This nucleus of knowledge pulls in research resources from around the world, and the most promising ideas advance from concept through pilot-scale manufacturing. From benchtop to bedside, all from inside the TPMC.
So here's the status of where we're at on this project. This project was conceived several years ago as a charge from both the board and the president to be very strategic on what we were going to do with our academic enterprise. And we started taking a look at our different colleges and said, okay, we've got great, but the sum of that greatness is going to be much, much greater pulled together in some type of a collaborative research effort. This building is a representation of that concept, is we bring these colleges together in a single facility that allows us to do things across lines, across academic lines we've not done in the past on this campus. Right now, this is still at the concept stage. We have finished the programming study on this, so we know that we're going to be looking at somewhere between $120 and $163 million facility. We know that it's going to be somewhere between 200 and 245,000 gross square foot. It's going to have adaptable labs in there. It's going to have good manufacturing process space. It's going to have core facilities for imaging, vivarium space, but more important, it's going to have this collaborative space for all these different disciplines to take a look at how we can become even the best of the best within our research institutes. So in conclusion, my promise to this board, my president, my chancellor, is that everything that we do in our master planning will further the academic mission. If it does not further the academic mission, we will not bring it to the board. We will improve the quality and efficiency of our research space. We will improve the efficiency of our space utilization, and we will reduce the E&G space that's needed for the work we're going to do and slow our deferred maintenance growth and slow our FC&I. That concludes my presentation.
I was looking around to see if Delafontaine was still here when you were talking about the precision medicine. I didn't see him. I just want to make the comment that the university has two medical schools, the larger one and the one more engaged in research here on the Columbia campus. The UMKC Medical School, if they are known for anything, it is translational research. One of the professors there is recognized as one of the top 50 researchers in the country in translational research. And that is an opportunity for inter-campus collaboration. I just wanted to make that note because as this project progresses, and I know that Dean Delafontaine and the dean at UMKC have gotten along very well and are talking about these things. So I thought I'd plant that seed so that we can talk about it in future meetings.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so may I have a motion and a second from the Governance and Resources and Planning Committee to recommend to the board to approve the University of Missouri-Columbia 2017 Master Plan?
Second the motion.
We had a motion
Oh,
first?
motion. I thought you were making a motion.
Can I get a second?
Am I on your committee? I'll second it.
Cindy, can you conduct a roll?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
All committee votes in favor?
Now can we have a motion to approve by the board 2017 master plan update?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Cindy, could you call the roll for a vote?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Is there anything else from the governance committee? If not, you
That's
take
it.
a motion to adjourn?
Yes, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Okay, all committee votes in favor.
Next, we're staying pretty well on schedule. So Curator Snowden, we have the Academic, Student, and External Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's only one information item, and it's an enrollment management update. And in light of our falling enrollment, we're going to call upon Dr. Pelama Maurice to show us how we're going to solve this problem.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Paloma Morris, and I've been on the campus community here since September 2016. This is my sixth and hopefully last campus, but it's been a great introduction to this community, this environment. And we do have a pretty complex enrollment puzzle. We could actually spend an entire day talking about this topic. This first draft of this slide deck was about 76 slides, so we've condensed it as much as possible. There's a lot of information. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. If we could try our best to get through the material first, that would be great, only because some of your questions might be answered in the material, and I want to make sure we get everything covered. Enrollment is obviously a very hot topic, lots of interest. One thing I want to be clear, enrollment means a lot of things to many different people. These days in the field, enrollment means much more than just admissions, much more than financial aid. Enrollment is about our institution as a whole, and there are lots of different things that impact our ability to attract, retain, and have students persist on to degree completion. So please know when I say the words enrollment, I'm talking about a pretty large suite of things that we need to consider. For today, I'm going to give you, as best as I can, a summary, kind of recap of where we sit, some things that we've been thinking through, but also, again, some history and some context for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about strategic positioning, so where Mizzou, our fantastic Mizzou, sits in the marketplace and perspective from some other environments. We're going to talk very briefly about some strategic efforts that we've already accomplished since the last year. I'll leave those up and keep talking because I really want to move the conversation into some things that we're thinking about here moving forward, and then have a hopefully some good exchange and opportunities to discuss enrollment trade-offs. One of the interesting things about this work is, believe it or not, we actually can't accomplish everything that we want. We've got to make some decisions around prioritization to achieve some of the outcomes in which we think are most helpful for us. In terms of a recap, it's always good to take a holistic look at where we've sat overall in terms of our overall enrollment. This is all inclusive, undergraduate, graduate, et cetera. You'll see that as an institution, we've grown. A lot of that growth did come from first-year increases in our first-year freshman classes, but there are lots of different ways to grow an overall environment, whether it be online, graduate, professional, retaining more students, et cetera. But overall, you can see there where we've sat historically over time. It's also good to look, this is what we call in our work our admissions funnel. So the number of applications that we receive going through the pipeline, how many students we admit, how many students end up enrolling, and then what that means in terms of our traditional yield percentage. For us in our world, yield is essentially the the percentage of students who accept our offers of admission, and you can see where that's set here over time. A couple really interesting points to make sure you are aware of before we move on from this slide. As you can see there, we've done quite well up until last year in terms of this current application cycle, in terms of increasing the number of applications, which is essentially a marker of interest to our environment. That has gone quite well. You'll see over time there that our admit rate, the number of students that we admit in our environment, has continued to decline and go in that direction from 85% to about a 77% admit rate. That still does put us at a pretty high number in terms of our overall admission rate. But more importantly, yield is one of those markers that really give you a pretty clear sense of where you sit in the marketplace. Our overall yield, even at the height of our interest, our overall yield was slipping over time. If you disaggregate that between non-resident and resident students, we've actually been fairly consistent up until the last two cycles. with our resident yield. That's been in the 40%, 40 to 45 to 55% range. Where we've seen the biggest declines and where you see the overall aggregate yield slipping is when you go out of state more to increase your out-of-state enrollment, out-of-state interest, you also then take the risk of having your yield go down as well. So our out-of-state yield has continued to slip because you're going into different marketplaces, and it's a lot tougher to get those students to stick. But just an important thing for you to pay attention to, and an important marker for our financial ratings. It's always good to look at historically where we've sat in terms of first-year retention, six-year graduation rate. You'll see a lot of consistency here over time in these markers. Depending on your perspective, you can see consistency as opportunity, or you can see it as success. I would say that those rates are so consistent for us that we probably have some opportunity to move the needle at least 5 points in both of those key metrics. There's a lot more that goes into that, but I think there's some opportunities for us to be more aggressive in those two areas, and that all comes back to student success, which we'll talk about a little bit more later here. One of the things I wanted to mention and talk through just for a little bit is how we grew historically, for some context for you. So every institution has a decision to make about what they want to prioritize. Some institutions prioritize quality, some institutions prioritize growth, some prioritize racial and ethnic diversity. Over the last, I'd say, 10 years, it was clear that our mantra and our primary method for success was growing the first-year freshman class, which we did quite successfully. So we did lay down a pretty, and I wasn't here, but I'm just trying to paraphrase for you. It was clear that we did lay down a pretty clear goal, which was to grow the class. We did that in a pretty aggressive manner, and we're pretty successful in that. It was clear, though, as well, that increasing racial and ethnic diversity was also important for this community, and some gains were made in that arena as well. We always, in this environment, want to continue to grow revenue. It is an important aspect for us moving forward, but it's clear historically these were the primary overarching goals, with our freshman class being the #1 priority. I'm going to get into a little bit more of this in the next slides, but one of the ways in which we accomplished that success in terms of growing the first-year class, one, we increased our applicant base. As you've seen there, we got more and more applications from across the country and in-state. We did very well out of state. Most of that growth came from a very small number of states, mostly Illinois, but also other states. We also accomplished that growth a great deal by discounting. So our scholarship policy was very, very aggressive, which gave us a good pricing model, and we were able to attract students in that particular manner. We also were able to increase that first-year class through admitting probationary admits. And that's a topic area, again, we'll dive into a little bit more as well. It's always good to look at tuition revenue from an entering class standpoint. So you can always look at this from your overall aggregate undergraduate student body, but it's also good to pull it out and look at what you're bringing in every year in terms of the students who are coming into your environment, so your new inputs, if you will. A few things to point out here. This is from 2011 and onward. It is eye-opening for many to look at what our net tuition revenue per student numbers look like over time, both in-state and out-of-state. You'll see here that if you look up at our resident numbers, we're projecting this year that we'll end up right around the 5,000 mark in terms of first-year net tuition student revenue per student. We have, that number has been going, obviously, as you can see there, not in the right direction, even in the height of our success with the numbers of students we're bringing in. So while our aggregate revenue was moving in the right direction, the tuition revenue that we're receiving on resident students in terms of that average net tuition revenue has not been increasing.
Just a quick question. You talked about increasing racial diversity, racial and ethnic diversity. How are you measuring that? And then number two, where is MU or the system at right now? What percentages, by whatever measurements you're using?
Yeah, sure. When we talk about racial and ethnic diversity, we're just talking about the raw percentage and the raw end. So what the percentage of students are in our community. I don't want to misspeak on that percentage, so I'll make sure I cover that and get that number for you and make sure I get that right. I don't have it off the top of my head this immediate second, but I'll make sure I get you that right number. But over that 10-year period, and I don't have that slide because, again, trying to condense this, we did see an increase in racial diversity, ethnic diversity, and I'll make sure you get the right information there for you. That's up until these last couple of years where we've seen lots of different changes in our metrics for all of our students, but we did see an increase over that 10-year period. On the revenue end, you'll also see there as we look about, our overall tuition revenue, net tuition revenue, about $59 million there in 2014. And as we're sitting here now moving into this projected year, we're looking at that number to be a little bit around $36 million. One of the areas, again, that we want to continue to think about and pay more close attention to, again, is that net tuition revenue per student. That's a very, very important marker for us, and one, again, that we haven't seen the traction even when we were successful in attracting more first-year students. The probationary admit group is also another one I want to highlight and get your eyes on. That is a group, these are students who don't meet our automatic admission qualifications. These are students who are off perhaps a point or two on some of those metrics. We have, even when we are at the height of our interest over the time, we have continued to admit a high number there. All of our numbers have been adjusted here the last year, but you'll see a pretty large cohort there every year that we bring in. More importantly, those students do yield at a particularly high rate, and they tend to have fewer options in the marketplace, and so they're very excited about joining our community. We are a public land grant environment, and so we absolutely care deeply about student access, but we also want those students to be successful. You can see by these retention and 4- and 6-year graduation rates, they are lower than our traditional student population, and I'll get into that a little bit more. We've got some opportunities to improve those outcomes as well. It's good for us to think about where we sit in the marketplace on a few metrics. I wanted to show you, this is a slide that tells you where the admitted students from fall 2016 who chose not to attend Mizzou decided to attend for their institutional choice. You'll see there that Missouri State, about 672 of our admits decided to attend Missouri State versus our environment. And you can go down the list here. A few good takeaways from this that I want to make sure we mention. One, the reason why a place like Illinois is up there so high is because we recruit so heavily in Illinois. And there's a few other institutions on there that would fall into that same category. It's also good for you to know that Missouri State has been in the second slot for quite some time, and their numbers tend to vacillate anywhere between 450 to 525 a year. Very consistent, no particular trajectory up and down every year. But this last cycle is the first year that they've moved in that particular slot in terms of where we lose students to the most. And at least a quarter of the students you see in that 672 number were not actually admissible to Mizzou and would have fallen into that probationary group. We've seen some gains here over the last 10 years by Arkansas. We've seen some gains here by Alabama. Those institutions were farther down on the list many, many years ago. But you can see again where our students that we're admitting who are not deciding to enroll, non-matriculated, end up attending. It's always good to also look at where we sit in the marketplace in terms of average ACT. We are currently at 26 with our last class, and we'll be in that range again this year. In-state, obviously WashU is a different environment, but in-state you'll still see that there's not a lot of separation between Mizzou and some of our other in-state institutions. We've got some opportunities to consider what our approaches will be here long-term. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe UMKC will be a little closer to 26 this year when they announce their information. If you look at non-SEC out-of-state averages, again, we kind of fall in that same trajectory. We've got, those are our 3 top out-of-state competitors, Indiana, Urbana, non-SEC out-of-state competitors in Iowa. We have just hit 26 last year for the first time. As prospective students and families are looking at that, that's where we sit in their eyes in the marketplace. And then if you look at where we sit in the SEC, there's obviously lots of ties here, but just to give you a vantage point and a perspective about where that positions us in our new conference from just an academic standpoint in terms of the incoming class. And also Pell Grant enrollment, undergraduate and Pell Grant enrollment. We have obviously a public access mission, Pell Grant eligibility. For us, we end up in the 21% range overall. You tend to see, as you can see, Vanderbilt at the top here with a 34 and down here at 14. There tends to be some alignment here with those two metrics, but there are lots of institutions, Florida's and Georgia's are good examples of institutions that have found a way to balance out those tensions and still make sure that they can have a high achieving environment with their ending class, but also still attract and enroll a particular number of students. If I'm not mistaken, and somebody can correct me, I think it's Florida that has actual performance measures in place around the number of low-income students who are enrolled in your environment. So those are things for us to consider as well moving forward. I could go on a lot about what we've done thus far, and we get that question a lot. I'm going to leave some things up and move through these, and so you can read them as they're here. I'm sure you have them in front of you as well. Coming into a picture like this, where we've got some historic declines in the first-year class. This is this is a unique environment in terms of the percentage of decline of the first-year class in terms of interest. So we have come in and tried to think about a few things first and foremost. One thing is we have never actually had a strategic enrollment plan for the University of Missouri. And I know that, I want to say that one more time. We've never had an actual enrollment plan. What we had historically is a great deal of growth that then drove strategy. And we did not have a strategic plan to then make some and gird some of those decisions about what we do moving forward. So it is important for us to think about developing our first enrollment plan. That is a process that we have just launched last month. It will take some time, I'll get into that in a second, but it is important for us to have a roadmap of where we're headed so we can make good decisions moving forward versus other factors driving those decisions. People have been asking a great deal about what we've been doing, again, to help mitigate the situation that we're in. One thing I do, and I'm going to leave these up and not read these out loud so you can see them. One thing I will mention as I roll through these is this is the same admissions office that brought us a great deal of success over the last decade. And they are highly respected and high-quality individuals. And they're not the reason why we have a downturn in the number of applicants, and they're not the reason why we have a downturn in a decline in yield. So but that does not mean that we are still not using that group in a highly effective way to try to turn the needle, but it will take much broader macro-level institutional decisions to help position us for some things in the future. So this office continues to move that needle as much as they can from their scope in the admissions office. You name it, they've been pulling out their hats in many different ways and really focused a lot on personal engagement, making sure they're connecting with students and families, flying in guidance counselors, having current students attend panels. As I go down the list here, I mean, they've upticked as much as they possibly can, and we still find ourselves in the position that we're in terms of attracting students to our environment for the last 2 cycles. We've also introduced the STAMP Scholarship Program this current cycle. That's a great thanks to Dean Kirpius and the Journalism School, who knows the Stamps family personally and helped us get that program introduced to our environment. Those are the outcomes you want. We only have 5 slots, but it's a pretty thorough and rigorous process. The packages for those students were outstanding, and there were some incredible students, all ended up in the Honors College because they're quite exceptional, and we're very fortunate that was a good add for us this year. What we keep getting asked, and what we wanted to talk about the most, is what are we going to be doing moving forward? We've wrapped that around 3 important goals for us to consider. One of those is to increase demand. As you can see there, our application base dropped roughly around 25%, down to 16,000 applications this year. That's a significant decline in interest. We've got to work to increase demand and enhance the value. So, there's many ways to enhance value. We enhanced We worked on that historically here by discounting. There might be some other more fundamentally structural sound ways to enhance the value of what we're offering here for our environment. The other thing we want to do is think about inculcating a strategic enrollment culture. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of ability to make decisions that can influence the outcomes that we have some control over, and I'll walk through a few of those as well. And we have to think much more holistically about what success means. Large can be viewed as better in many cases, and we will continue to map out a path towards long-term growth. But there are a lot of other factors that I'll mention here that are markers of success. In terms of that brand value proposition, one thing we're very excited about is partnering with the new Strategic Communications Office. That is going to be a very exciting initiative for us. We have absolutely some opportunities to improve people's perceptions about Mizzou. That will not be the only way that we accomplish this, but I can't help but mention how excited we are to be able to partner with them on that. The SEM planning effort, we've already kicked it off. It'll take about a year, and where I want to focus the rest of this conversation, and more importantly, is what do we do short term, and how do we prioritize some of those goals short term. Obviously, President Choi has already put out an enrollment goal for us in terms of the freshman class, a long-term goal that we will march towards. What's important for us is to think about what do we do to get to that point, and what foundation do we need to do to get there, given that we are the interest in our environment is at an all-time low. We have to think carefully about the foundation and the roadmap to get to that goal. When we think about enrollment goals, so here's a fun teaser for you. We all want these three primary outcomes when we talk about enrollment. Most people want to see some growth. Most people want to see some advancements in net tuition revenue, and most people want to see quality and excellence continue to grow at a good clip. There isn't anybody in my seat across the country who will say, I can get you all three with absolute consistency and growth in the way in which you would want it, which is why you'll see here that we clearly chose this 10 years ago. We put a lot of time and money and investment into it, and we were very, very successful. And as you saw before there, the net tuition revenue did not move in the right direction. And while we did see some gains in one marker of academic excellence, we perhaps did not see them at the pace in which we could expect if we prioritize one or the other. And so these three things all pull on each other if you move in either direction. And it is always good to think through and prioritize which one, short, middle, and long term, we want to spend our time and effort on, because then we map the strategies and the approaches around that goal to make sure that we can accomplish it for you. And no matter what we do, and this is embedded in all of this, we have to really think carefully about student success. As I talked about the first year retention numbers and graduation rates, you can absolutely build a path towards this by investing in student success, and that will be important for us. But historically, this is what we measured as a successful outcome. When we had a larger class, there was excitement, there was joy, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and that was deemed a successful year. These are all the things that we look at when we sit down at the end of the year and we go, what was a successful year? And while it's impossible for us collectively as a community to be able to see year to year large gains in all of these categories, what we do want to see is slow momentum in making sure that we start to see progress in all these categories over a long-term period. And so this is a constant balancing act, this work, in terms of tension points and figuring out how to make sure we get in that direction. But I wanted you to get a sense of the scope of the variables that we consider as success, and hope that we can again start to think about those collectively as well. Geographic diversity is a big one for us, socioeconomic diversity, academic diversity, et cetera. Moving forward, we have made some decisions about some things that are going to be important for us here in the next year. That probationary admit group that you saw and their student success rates, we absolutely have an opportunity, and we will think about some student success programming that's far more coordinated and much more intrusive, if you will, to make sure we can see that probationary admit group move there in the right direction. We're also going to spend more time making thoughtful decisions about who we admit off of that probationary admit group. In other words, we're going to think about all of these different variables when we're making those decisions and take a much more thoughtful approach versus the way that we've been doing it here historically. We're also going to start to map out more pathways for student access. The community college space is a space that we have not made significant investments in over time. There is a treasure trove of opportunity here, both what's good for Mizzou, both what's good for the state, and what's good for students and outcomes. We have reorganized ourselves to prepare to do this work as of June 7th, and we are excited about investing more in our community college space. Lots of options there for us to consider, but Mizzou MAC is one that we launched this year. We'll be doing others, and that will be important for us going forward. We are also going to start to thoughtfully adjust the application deadlines. Technically, we actually don't have an application deadline here at the University of Missouri. It will be important for us. Technically, after June 1, we only get roughly about 50 applications. That's not unusual, but do we need to make sure that we've got some deadlines to support that as we go forward. Thankfully, we're also going to be launching the common application here that will go live here in August. That will bring us a lot more interest from across the country as well. We are going to uptick our rural recruitment efforts here in the state of Missouri. That's been an area that we have mapped out a plan and a roadmap to do more than we have in the past. We will get into some details about that perhaps the next time we chat, but we have mapped out a roadmap to be able to do that, and we are starting to have some discussions with Extension and Engagement about how we can leverage that partnership and collaboration to do that as well. But irrespective of that, we will be visiting every high school in the state of Missouri moving forward. We also think we have some opportunities to grow in some of our non-feeder markets. So we have our core feeder markets are obviously Columbia, St. Louis, Kansas City, the state of Missouri in general. Beyond that, there are some other communities that we feel we can invest in even more. We will do some more work in the Springfield market, Dallas, Houston, Denver, Nashville, and we're already invested in California, but we feel as though there's some opportunities to improve some of our out-of-state recruitment in those areas. We are also getting ready to announce here in August some exciting new opportunities for us as we think about influencing economic mobility here in the state of Missouri. We are a public institution. We care deeply about our Pell-eligible students and low-income students. We will launch in August a new scholarship opportunity that will essentially, for any Pell-eligible student, be able to cover their full tuition and fees. That will be an exciting endeavor for us. We will roll that out again in August. That will be called the Missouri Land Grant Scholarship, and we're very excited about, again, improving economic mobility for all low-income residents here in the state of Missouri. There will be a addition to that called the Missouri Land Grant Honors. So anyone who is admitted to our fantastic honors environment we will meet 100% of their unmet need. And so we'll make that proposition essentially as affordable as we possibly can. We can't do better than 100%, but we are excited about that opportunity here to, again, and that's about keeping our high-achieving low-income students here in the state, attending our environment. That increases the likelihood that they will stay a part of our community and invest in our community long-term. We will also be announcing here shortly some enhancements to our National Merit Scholarships, again at attracting some of our high-achieving students, keeping them in state, and we'll start in state with those enhancements, again helping us move that needle forward. So as we march into the new cycle here on a short-term basis, we do and we will be having some discussions again about how do we lay the foundation for that long-term growth that President Choi has already discussed. And where we sit right now is we've got to start to think about whether or not which prioritization will allow us to accomplish that long-term growth, given the context that we're in and the environment that we're in. And so again, I'll leave this up to answer as we answer any questions that you might have. Student success is not an option, it's a requirement for us to invest in as we go forward. You can see how student success will improve a lot of these other enrollment-related metrics, but we've also got to think again short-term, which one of these three areas are we going to focus on in terms of prioritization, given that we will always focus on student success and student access, but we've got some other decisions here to make as we move forward. So I know there are probably going to be a lot of questions. I will make sure I get the answer to your question here, but would love to make sure I can answer your questions about what we presented today.
Dr. Morse, real quickly, the
Yeah.
tuition revenue slide, I don't know if you can get to that or not.
Oh, certainly can. Too many slides here. Okay.
All right, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, at least the projection for 2017-18 indicates that that tuition per student's only going to be about $5,000, right?
Correct.
Yet our tuition back in 2011 was 5,348, and then 5,400, et cetera. And we've had cost of enrollment, cost of, under the Senate bill, we get to raise it every year a little bit. And why wouldn't this number be greater now than it
Sure.
was 5 years ago?
Sure. Well, the net tuition revenue is the tuition revenue minus financial aid offered. And
So we're just giving more financial aid, that's what you're saying?
correct. We've had a heavy discounting strategy historically to attract the class that we have attracted in the past. Yep.
By the same token, the out-of-state number is gone from 14,000 up to 16, almost 16.5 this year, right?
Correct. Same answer. Yeah.
So we're not really giving much to out-of-state students then?
No. Yeah. Well, we do our discount rate. I mean, we offer the discount rates are in the 30 percentile range, and so we know there's a significant amount of financial aid offered to out-of-state and in-state students. Overall, we offer a great deal of financial aid to attract the class that we've attracted over time. Yeah.
Now, let me jump to the one about opportunities of non-feeder markets.
Sure.
I can understand why you go to Springfield, Nashville, maybe Dallas, Denver. Houston and California seem to be a real stretch as far as why you pick those rather than some other
Sure.
cities or areas close
Yeah,
by.
I'll walk through that a little bit and share with you what we're thinking and what's happened. So these are not, other than Nashville, these are markets that we're already in and have been in for quite some time. Okay. So when I talk about these opportunities, I'm talking about we think that they're going to continue to grow. So where these aren't markets that, again, Nashville technically is the only new entry into this environment. So we've seen growth outside of the last year. We've seen growth in Dallas and Houston consistently over the last 7 years. And we continue to see that as an opportunity in a marketplace that will continue to grow.
Would there be any logic to looking at markets where the SEC print, whether south of Missouri, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas especially, because we recruit a lot of
Right.
kids from
Sure.
football players from Texas, and it would seem like if someone wants to follow the SEC as a student, then they're going to say, okay, where
Sure.
can I go to school that's an SEC school?
Yeah.
Maybe I picked Missouri just because of they've got a particular program.
So that's a great question. Outside of Alaska and Hawaii, there isn't a state that we don't recruit in heavily. So when we say, a feeder market that we thinks has opportunity for growth, we recruit in Georgia, we recruit in Kentucky, we recruit in Arkansas. Have we been successful in those environments? Not as successful as we have been in these environments.
Okay.
So, you can send representatives to advocate for your environment. We do that. We do that in those states, but it is not, we have not seen the traction that we would expect to see.
So why have we been successful in those markets and not others?
That's a really great question. And I would have to dig through some qualitative data and have some students from those markets talk through. I can give you my perspective. Their perspective is far more important. I'll walk through a little bit here for you. The parts in California that we've been very successful in tend to look very similar to Missouri. So if you go down the inner Central Valley of California and then make a right down there by LA and go in the Inland Empire, we've done very well in those environments. I would say that those environments are people who resonate culturally with the state of Missouri and feel comfortable in this environment. And they're also getting squeezed on major opportunities, academic major opportunities in their home state of California. In terms of Dallas and the Houston market, there's from a public standpoint, depending on where you sit in terms of options, there's really only 2 or 3 places that are highly, highly desirable. After that, there's a lot of stuff in the middle in the state of Texas. And so we look very attractive to some people in those environments. And it's still a good driving distance from here to get home. And that's always an important consideration for families, is how quickly can my son, daughter, or they student get home as well.
I was going to add a comment on that. With the new flights coming out of the Columbia Regional Airport, are you actively trying to hit those markets, Chicago and Denver and Dallas?
We've been in Chicago for a long time. It's actually Chicago and the state of Illinois are the primary reason for most of that undergraduate growth. So that's been a consistent market for us. We're not divesting from that market. One of the slides I pulled out of this deck is the state of Illinois will have some pretty drastic declines in high school enrollment the next 15 years. So new investments, physical investments in that market where we're already very well invested is not a good long-term strategic decision for us. But yes, we love any time Columbia adds a new line in the airport, and we're excited about the new Denver opportunity as well. So,
Could you speak to Springfield?
Sure. One of the interesting things that is, as we looked at our enrollment data, or I should say our admissions data, of all, the last 2 years we've seen some declines in all of our freshman classes, but we didn't actually see that big of a decline in the Springfield market. And so we feel that that's an opportunity for us.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, Plymouth, one of the concerns I have is National Merit Scholars.
Yes.
How do we put a full court press on some of these Missouri high school graduates who are National Merit Scholars and get them to Mizzou? Because I can tell you that's really important with the AAU. And I don't think we got a single National Merit Scholar last year.
I know we had at least one, but
New one or already here?
New one. I know we had at least one. It's a pretty easy equation. We have to offer them a greater package. We've been going through options. We have some options in place. We'll be announcing those here shortly. They're going to be very aggressive in terms of the package that will be offered, and we hope that will move the needle for us, and we expect it to. But our packages will look significantly much more aggressive than they have been historically.
Good, thank you.
Palema, how many, to just follow up on Marcy's question, for comparable universities in the Midwest, how many National Merit Scholars do they typically get?
It's only the institutions that are really, really aggressive. And so typically, so I'm going to take out Oklahoma, I'm going to take out Arkansas, I'm going to take out Alabama because they're not typical. They're very aggressive in this marketplace. They made those investments over a decade ago, and that they've built up over time. Beyond that, you'll see anywhere from a low of 2 to 3 to a high of 15. But it really depends on what environments you're looking at. Obviously, the flagships tend to do a better job of that. Some of the private institutions that are much more selective do a much better job of that. But in our space, we're at the lower end of the spectrum, and that's why we're going to be making some changes to improve that.
Yeah, Oklahoma, what numbers do they have, since we can at least have an aspirational school?
Yeah, was it 100, 200 or so? Yeah, and essentially they offer them, everything but a car. It's pretty aggressive, and it works. And it moves a needle on people's perceptions of that institution. Mm-hmm. We are going to focus first on the residents of Missouri and enhancing our packages to keep those Missourians here in the state. We will be very aggressive. Our package will look somewhat similar, and we are hopeful that will move the needle for us.
Another question regarding our decrease in enrollment.
Yes.
Did anybody ever look at the demographic characteristics of the kids that ordinarily would have came here but didn't come here?
Yeah.
Because I think that would tell a story about why they're not
coming. That was another slide. But that's essentially what I did the first 60 days on the job, is dig deep. And that was for the last class. And essentially what we found is we saw losses across the board. One of the things I want to, and I'll get into that a little deeper, up until November 2015, we were on record to have our best class in terms of size. So things were, all the indicators were moving in the right direction. When we drill down after the cycle, what we saw is losses in our core feeder markets, with the primary losses in Kansas City, Columbia, St. Louis, Chicago, and the Illinois suburbs. From a percentage standpoint, we did see a pretty big decline in our students of color across all those spectrums, but we are still a predominantly white institution. So from a raw end standpoint, we did see the lion's share of those, from a demographic standpoint, the lion's share of those who opted out of that out of our environment were Caucasian families.
So how quickly can we get a plan in place to get these National Merit Scholarships? If it goes to our AAU rankings, how quickly do you think we can put a plan?
Oh, it's done. We just need to tie up a couple details. Moon has been great and very supportive. President Choi has been great and very supportive about what that looks like. We're probably no more than a week out from being able to say publicly what that will look like, but it will be very aggressive.
Go ahead. One last question regarding your junior college kids.
Yes.
We spoke briefly about
Yeah.
this yesterday. We historically haven't went after junior college kids. I know UConn was very successful in getting a lot of junior college folks in. Why haven't we in the past? And then do we have some benchmarks now set for the future?
Yeah. So one, full disclosure, it's not only good for Mizzou and good for the state. I'm also a community college graduate, so it's a very important community for me. We historically, I'll share with you what I've heard. Obviously, I wasn't here, but it's just never been the priority. The priority has been growing first-time freshmen, both from a revenue standpoint, from the excitement of saying the class is growing every year. It just became the priority. We know community college students are successful academically in the classroom, if not more so retention-wise than some of our first-year students. We know that it's a marketplace for us that we need to invest in. Community college students are also far more consistent in their decision patterns about where they should attend, and much more regional, which is exciting for us. And so historically, it just has not been a priority. It's not a group that we have avoided at all, but I don't think we've made the significant investments that we will make moving forward. We just announced a reorganization in our group, and we've dedicated some people full-time to focus on developing these partnerships. I just met with MCCA 2 days ago, and as an introductory meeting to say hello, we care and we want to invest, and we're ready to get moving on that. And I don't foresee any barriers to us moving the needle on the community college group. In fact, I think there's lots of excitement about what we can do there, both from a credit standpoint in terms of how we handle the transfer process, but also in terms of scholarships and outcomes. I know that there's discussion also about a potential transfer center on campus, so this is a community that we're absolutely going to be making some investments in, and we're pretty excited about it.
So you obviously bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this, and you're
lots of mistakes too, so I've learned from them. Yeah.
And you're in the right place at the right time. This is the first time that we as a board have ever been educated on the enrollment process, and you've quickly analyzed. And actually, it's critical here on this campus. And you're campus oriented, right? Because you don't do system recruiting. The overarching question I'm going to ask is there any competition between the campuses? And are there opportunities to collaborate with the other campuses that might actually benefit mutually? And I'll give you just an example to get you thinking about this. Number one, you could save if you were visiting the same place and had a kangaroo as well as the black and gold here,
Yeah.
which is campus oriented, even though it says University of Missouri System. But just as an example, at S&T, I learned at our last visit that they have they have a great engineering, but they actually have a nuclear engineering program there, but they don't collaborate. The only reactor in the system is here. In fact, it's the only one of its kind in the country at an academic institution. if you had a collaboration between the recruiting functions, someone that wanted to go to nuclear engineering and was applying at S&T, that they might, but they say, well, you don't really have that much of a program. It's kind of an off program there. That person might be referred here and might end up coming to the engineering school here. Is there a process already in place for those kinds of cross referrals based on programs of excellence? And is there any opportunity to do some joint recruiting so that the person who's interested might go to one of the institutions, even if they don't go to S&T or UMSL or MU?
Sure. I will do my best to give a concise answer. I could give a long answer on that question.
A short one would be good.
I will do my best. So philosophically, to me, philosophically, there is no competition because we are all here to make sure Missourians get the education that they need. If you look at the actual data, one of the interesting things about the way our state is set up, we are so physically, we're so located in so many different locations that are nowhere near each other, that recruitment-wise, we don't see, I personally, is my opinion, you might get different answers from different people, I don't see a lot of, we don't see a lot of competition between students deciding between the two environments. Do we see a lot of transfer between some of the environments? If someone goes to X institution and says, hey, I'd like to come back home, or I'd like to come back to my environment that I'm used to, absolutely. But if you're talking about at the point of a first-year application, a freshman application, people sitting down and really debating thoroughly around UMSL or UMKC or Mizzou, we don't see a lot of that one-to-one competition on the first-year student base, which is probably why we don't recruit together traditionally. Now at the college and school level for S&T, that might be a different equation given that environment. I see there's probably some competition and there are some opportunities to collaborate there. Where I see the most opportunity for collaboration are two areas. One would be improving the pipeline for the state, for us collectively. So K through 12 access, K through 12 programming, K through 12 success initiatives to improve the pipeline for all of our institutions in the system. I see a lot of opportunity to collaborate there. And I see a lot of opportunity to collaborate on scholarship opportunities for the state of Missouri for any of our campuses and environments. We could recruit together. I wouldn't be surprised, I don't know the history if we haven't in the past. But we rarely would, my guess would be that we don't get students who are literally deciding between our four environments as much as you might expect.
I guess I leave it with you that in the future, I think this board and future boards will be looking at programs of excellence in different cities.
Yep.
People coming out of high school may not appreciate the differences that are offered on different campuses.
Absolutely.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's a very important one, yeah.
Are there other questions, Dr. Morris?
I have one. First of all, I want to congratulate you on moving as far and as fast as you have on both the Pell eligible scholarships and the merit scholarships. These things have been discussed by this board for some time, and you're moving them, and I appreciate it.
Well, and I will say, we appreciate the nudge, and that was a nudge from Kevin and yourself. We have a lot of work to do to rethink our whole scholarship strategy, and we're getting ready to do that now this summer. And we were trying to do our best to honestly wait until we had a better sense of our entire picture before we went out with anything new. But thanks to your nudge, we feel like this is something we would never pull back on no matter what other adjustments we make. So I did want to make sure I noted that as well.
I appreciate what you've done. How are you going to market, and how are you going to reach out to these Pell eligible students? Are you going to do this through in-person recruiters? Are we adding any more recruiters? Are we going to have more in-person contact, more mail contact? Do you have a strategy yet? It may be a little early for that.
Yeah, no, we've started talking about that the last 30 days. At this point, all we've gotten up to is a rollout strategy in terms of when we launch in August. Our next step in a few weeks is to talk about how we're going to improve awareness about the opportunity. It's interesting, you rarely get people who, for an opportunity like this, I don't think people's awareness will be our issue. I think people will learn about this very quickly, but we'll have a plan for that mapped out here shortly. We haven't gotten that far yet.
And finally, I feel like I need to pick up Don Cups's banner on this a little bit, which is, and I noticed the talk about Springfield and the numbers, and Curator Lehman, this is the only time I'm going to do it. You're going to have to do it from now on. But we hear a lot of anecdotal, and I defer to your expertise and your data, but we hear a lot of anecdotal data about students, particularly high-achieving students along the southern border of the state, getting multiple contacts from Arkansas, Alabama, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri State, and that we don't seem, at least anecdotally, to have the recruiting and the marketing presence that we should have. Of course, I'm old, and I go back to when the University of Missouri was clearly a force in that area of the state, and I don't know what the data shows, but I hope that there is an increased effort, because I think we would be highly competitive.
Yeah, no, there is this is not going to be any different than the great sport of football. We want to lock down, from a recruiting standpoint, the state of Missouri, and we're going to be aggressive in doing that, and that includes all of our communities, urban, rural, and suburban. I did note earlier, we have not invested short-term in rural recruitment as much as we are about to. When I say rural, I don't just mean Springfield. I noted Springfield as a market that we see lots of growth potential in, but our new plan that we've mapped out here, we will be covering the entire state in a much more significant way from a recruitment standpoint. And I think that those efforts will be noted, and if not, we'll hear the feedback. So,
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Again, I want to congratulate you on moving this far and this fast.
thank you. And I will get you, Darrell, that information. I don't like saying things if I'm not 100% sure, so I'll get you that information. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Very good report. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the Academic Affairs Committee?
So move.
Need a second?
Second that.
Cindy, call the roll.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Phillips,
Yes.
Curator Snowden.
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Next, we move into compensation and human resources, and Curator Lehman, that is your committee, and I think that you have action planned that'll take us into an executive session at some point.
Yes, I have no items for the public session, but if I could get a motion, please, to move into closed session tomorrow for Compensation and Human Resource Committee.
It'll have to come from the committee.
I'll also move. Second.
Cindy, will you please call roll?
Curator Chapman,
Yes.
Curator Farmer,
Yes.
Curator Lehman,
Yes.
Curator Steelman.
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to the Audit Committee. Curator Snowden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee has one information item and one action item. The information item is the Interim Chief Audit Executive, Michelle Periano, will present the first information of the Internal Audit and Consulting Annual Report. Michelle will review the activity of the past year, and then, after her presentation, answer any questions. Michelle?
Thank you. In this portion of the presentation, I will be reviewing with you the status of the fiscal year 2017 annual audit plan, a quick review of the year, and a report of the audits completed since the April board meeting. Since July of 2016, Internal Audit and Consulting Services has completed 19 projects and will complete an additional 17 for the fiscal year 2017 plan. And as we conduct audits and consulting projects, the team continues to grow in knowledge of the organization, its practices, and operating processes. And this is resulting in insights and recommendations that can be applied to other units across the organization, and it contributes to identifying trends at various levels of processes, resulting in better enterprise solutions. This year, we also used a non-traditional audit approach to assist smaller areas in learning how to conduct an annual security risk assessment as required by the Healthcare Information Portability and Accountability Act. Many of these smaller areas do not have the knowledge about how to conduct these annual risk assessments. So using this facilitated approach, the IT audit team teaches how to conduct the annual risk assessment and provides the tools, and then internal audit will assess the results at a later date. This is a more effective approach than auditing the process, developing findings, and requiring management to figure out how to conduct a security risk assessment to fulfill the agreed-to action plans. So this essentially reduces our compliance risk at a faster rate. Additional support that we provided this year was in support of the MU Finance Division's Finance Competency Training Series, which is an innovative approach they have developed to educate employees about fiscal responsibilities. And we are leading a collaborative effort with supply chain, finance, and the campuses to reduce risk around purchasing cards. And we continue to support the Ethics and Compliance Hotline. Since our April 2017 meeting, we have completed 2 internal audit reports and 2 consulting projects, are finalizing with management 5 internal audit reports and 1 consulting project, and performing field work for 5 internal audits, and we've started planning for 6 internal audits. And the 2 completed audits that I'm covering today are the reporting process of quality metrics and data for MU Health and HIPAA security risk assessment for student health and wellness at UMKC. Both of these audits actually had a risk rating of 1, so I'm really only going to cover what management is doing very well in these areas. And for the reporting process of quality metrics and data audit, 6% of Center for Medicare Services hospital payments are at risk under 3 quality incentive programs. So we were looking at how reliable the data to report on these quality metrics was, and MU Health, our work indicates the processes are working very well, and that furthermore, MU Health is proactive in identifying the drivers for improving these indicators and in collecting and tracking benchmarks to assess performance. The second audit, the HIPAA security rule assessment for student health and wellness at UMKC. This was one of those areas I was talking about where we used a different facilitated risk assessment. In this case, we didn't need to do that with this area because they have been conducting these HIPAA security audits for quite some time. And our audit work substantiated they have a thorough, fully documented, and defensible risk assessment for student health and wellness area, and management regularly conducts these as required by HIPAA. So this concludes this portion of my presentation, and are there any questions about that before we move on to the other?
Are there any questions of Michelle? Hearing none, we'll move to the second item, which is an action item, and it is regarding the University of Missouri Internal Audit Risk Assessment and Fiscal Year 2018 Internal Audit Plan. Michelle, if you'll review that and then answer any questions.
Yes. A key responsibility for internal audit and consulting services is development of a flexible and comprehensive annual plan based on an appropriate risk-based methodology. And we developed the fiscal year 2018 annual plan by considering the challenges and risks to the organization in consultation with senior leaders. And we also considered multiple risk types and audit coverage. At this time, the UM system, its campuses, and MU Health are working to transform the delivery of higher education and healthcare services as the traditional reimbursement models for both industries are changing. The UM system, the campuses, and the health system have opportunities and risks that leadership are mindful of while engaging in this transformative work. For example, the availability of less resources for strategic investments due to declining state support and student enrollment, and defining quality for higher education, and effectively communicating that value to the public and other stakeholders. And as you read through these, I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of things that already have been discussed here today and actual management actions to address them that are underway. Another important area is implementing a data management strategy for data-driven decision-making and performance management, and to optimize our competitive advantage by fully realizing the benefits of scale. So the fiscal year 2018 plan consists of 52 projects covering areas related to transformational work, academic and business units and processes, and information technology. And we're very aware that we will need to be very flexible as the year progresses and as work continues and areas are restructured. So in summary, Internal Audit and Consulting Services is presenting for approval a comprehensive and flexible plan developed with input from senior leaders with recommended audits in a number of areas to reduce the risk to the organization. Are there any questions?
Any questions of Michelle? Michelle, thank you very much. Appreciate your
Thank you.
presentation. Do I hear a motion from the Audit Committee to recommend to the Board to approve the fiscal year 2018 internal audit plan?
So moved.
Second.
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 Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
All committee votes in favor?
Now, is there a motion to approve by the board member?
Mr. Chairman, I move for the approval of the fiscal year 2018 internal audit plan as outlined on the board materials. And do I hear a second?
Second.
Cindy, could you call the roll?
Curator Chapman?
Yes.
Curator Farmer?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Lehman? Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Motion carried. At this time, as indicated by our agenda, we are at a point in the meeting where we go back into executive session. That'll be in the Don Ray Media Room, 211, where we were earlier. And we will be back at a public meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. 9 a.m.